Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to tournament poker strategy. And now, here are your hosts, Ron Fezbuddy and Killingbird.
Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. Killingbird here with Ron Fezbuddy, back for another episode, and this is going to be an exciting one. I know you're particularly excited about this.
Absolutely. Mr. Andrew Brokos is joining us today.
Yeah, and I know there's probably some people out there, well, probably not some, probably a lot of people who listen not only to this podcast, but also to his Thinking, well, I shouldn't say his and Nate Davis's Thinking Poker podcast. So I know there'll be a lot of people excited about having him on the show, as we are.
I hear a lot of people, well, I read a lot of people. I don't hear it because I'm talking about our forums. I read a lot of people saying that they listen to our podcast and Thinking Poker podcast. It feels like not necessarily saying that listens to Thinking Poker podcast listens to ours, but I think because it covers a wider range of poker. But I think a lot of people who listen to our podcast listen to the Thinking Poker podcast because it's a strategic podcast.
Yeah.
For that, so it does play well for tournament players, and a lot of the hands that he goes over are tournament hands. So I think a lot of people who listen to ours listen to Thinking Poker podcast, and we'll be excited to have Andrew on. It's like a meeting of poker podcast
celebrities. Just say it.
No, it's like when that's what I was thinking. Like when shows would cross over, like sitcoms in the '80s, like I don't know, like Mork and Mindy would be on Happy Days. I guess that was
right.
So it's like one of those.
Who's Mork and who's Mindy? I'm the Fonz, obviously, but I'm going to say Andrew's Mork.
Yeah, I think you're more of a Potsy, honestly. But.
Oh, too funny. So before we get Andrew on, we should catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been a little while. So how's poker been for you, or life in general?
Things are good. I feel like I live in Winterfell. We have snow after snow after snow. Geeky Game of Thrones reference for you don't know what I'm talking about, which is coming back soon, so we're very excited.
Yes.
Yeah, so poker is good and bad, like poker usually is. Upswings, some downswings. You know what I've noticed? That it's getting to feel on Bovada like, it's not fully the old days because of the anonymous tables, no sync breaks, but the pain starts to feel the same.
Oh yes, that feeling never seems to change for some reason.
No, I mean it like I had a run this week. I put a couple of sessions in, and I had one night with the fields are getting bigger. Like the nightly 25K, which is a $60 tournament, gets like 42K in buy-ins every night, which is awesome. That reminds me of the 50-50 back in PokerStars days, right?
Yep.
So it kind of reminds me of that tournament. So I want to play it every night now because it's so much fun.
Yeah.
But and then there's a $10 10K tournament, which granted it's not the biggest tournament in the world, but it gets like 1,300, 1,400 runners. It feels like those tournaments from the old days. And one night I finished 10th in the 25K, out of like, I don't know how many, 700 people or something, and maybe more than that. And then I finished 20th in the 10K, 1,500 runners on the same night. And that hasn't happened to me since pre-Black Friday with huge fields like that and bubbling. I mean, what did I say? Yeah, pretty much bubbling two final tables at the same time. It feels like, right. I mean, that used to happen on the reg, right? Like, you'd play, 25 tournaments, and a lot of times you get a 14th and a 16th, right? That frustration just came back, and it actually kind of feels good in a way.
You're like, that good old feeling.
Yeah, you feel like, I'm on the verge of something, right? So I was on a downswing of Bovada, but I've had, like, when that happens, like, it kind of helps your bankroll a little bit, right? Like, it still helps your bankroll. So, and when you have a couple of those nights in a row, it doesn't boost your bankroll, but it helps you a little bit. So I feel like I'm getting out of the downswing. How about you?
Cool. Just sort of plateau. I had like a nice, I can't remember what, but I had like a nice start to the year, then went on a little bit of a downswing, but then I won the nightly 60 on Merge the other night. People who play on Merge will know that's kind of like their flagship they have like they have 3 nightly tournaments, and what they call the nightlies. One of them is $60. So I finally won that, so I got that little monkey off my back. And so I kind of feel like I'm back on the upswing. And on the live front, I actually just kind of settled on my dates for World Series of Poker circuit event in North Carolina, so I'll be hitting that in April, so that'll be fun.
April? Exactly.
Yeah, early April. I think I'm going to go out for like 4 or 5 events.
Which events, like?
It's funny, I don't remember this being the case last year, but maybe it was. But almost every event leading up to it is a 365, and then the main is 1650, I think.
Right.
But I feel like last year, they had like
a 550,
500.
yeah, they had like 560 or something like that.
Yeah, and I think there might have been like 500 PLO or something. But I mean, obviously, I only played no limit, so I only looked at the no limit events. But the entire time I'm there, it's just all 365 rig events. So, which is fine with me. I mean, I'm not a high stakes baller, so I got no problem going and playing, maybe 5 365. So
nice.
Should be fun.
Nice. I'm going to take a day off next week and go to Foxwoods for it's a small $400 75K. They'll probably get like 100K. So it's nothing huge, but I know Foxwoods is kind of on decline, their poker room, and most people don't really like it, but I kind of like it. I don't know. It's a comfortable poker room for me. I think it's super soft. And it's the easiest poker room for me to get to. I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go play that. It's a 2-day tournament. So I'll go hit that, see what happens, and really start to ramp up practice for the World Series.
Yep, won't be long now. God, it's hard to believe it's coming so quick.
Still waiting for the official schedule, but that should be here.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about, I think last time they announced the dates, and a sort of pseudo schedule leaked a few days ago, but it was only like the big event.
Yeah,
like
they didn't
50K.
They didn't give you the big. They didn't give you the rest of them. Just the 10Ks.
And there's even some question as to whether it was actually accurate and things like that. Although there was an interesting part of that leaked schedule, which was that they were going to guarantee $10 million for the winner of the main event.
I noticed that. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess normally I think putting a guarantee on a tournament is always a good thing. When Florida did that big $5 million guarantee, like it brought in tons of people. It just seems like that it usually increases participation so much. I just don't know if it matters for the main event.
It's 100% does not matter for the main event. I don't think a $10 million final winner, because it's $10 million the winner guaranteed. It's not a.
Yeah, I believe that's how I read it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would make a difference if they made a $100 million prize pool guarantee.
Right.
But I think a $10 million winner guarantee doesn't make a difference, and I think that money is going to come from other places. Since I don't think it's going to increase the prize pool, it's going to come from the rest of the prize pool, and I think that's a big mistake. I think pulling that money out of circulation, like the utility of someone winning $10 million as opposed to winning $8 million, is not that much higher than some like another 400 people cashing, which is I mean that could hurt. I mean maybe they don't take I think what it's like 600. Let's say it doesn't impact. Maybe 6,300 people register. I think that's around what registered last year. And let's say it doesn't impact that at all, right? They paid 666, I think. I think that's what they paid. That might have been the year before, but or not. But that's roughly what they paid. If they pay, I don't know. Maybe they'll pay 600 this time, right? So some of the money comes out of people min cashing, and they'll probably pay a lot less along the lines to make up for that $10 million. And I just don't think the utility function, the happiness that comes from someone making $2-3 million more from a first place prize is worth the fact that you're going to pull a lot of money out of the poker economy and dissuade more people from coming back next year. And
right, especially the casual players. Well, casual, putting up 10,000.
Yeah,
but,
look, I mean, not even casual players. We're pretty serious, and I want to have more of a shot to min cash. I'm not playing to min cash, but I certainly want 60 more people to cash than win 10 million as opposed to win 8.3 million. One out of 63,300 times. So
now it will be interesting. They might just be confidently expecting so many more people because they are going to be running satellites online.
That's true.
Which,
I didn't think about that.
maybe they feel like, wow, we can run, they've set up their satellite schedule and they feel like we can run so many satellites between now and summer that, we're confident we can add,
why not test that first?
1,000 people.
Why not,
that's a good
test
point.
that? It doesn't. I still don't think it's going to make those people more likely to more people's satellite. I just don't think it's going to impact any of that. And if you see that next year, then sure, go ahead and do it. And like I said, guarantee the event prize pool, but that's much more risky for them, right? You guarantee 10 million first prize, and you get 12 million people, 12 million in the prize pool. You're still not, you're not on the hook, right? Otherwise, you're on the hook if you guarantee the full prize pool, and they're not going to do that. Maybe next year they do after they see what the value of satellite entries are.
Mm-hmm.
But so I'm not a fan of that. I actually was kind of bummed to see that. I didn't like that, but
At the end of the day, it's probably just a press release hook for them, something for them to be able to say, for the first time ever,
right.
We're guaranteeing X amount of dollars.
Yeah.
But I guess it is what it is.
Right.
Still play it.
Right. Yep.
So.
Yep. Still going to try to play it. So, I'm still just waiting for that rest of that schedule to come out so I can figure out the rest of the time because I'm already starting to get ready for it.
Definitely want to figure out dates and travel schedules and stuff like that. So for members, hit the forums. There's a thread in there about this year's World Series. So let us know when you're going to be out there. We'll be posting in there as well about our schedules, and we'll probably do a meetup again this summer and stuff. So
absolutely.
Should be fun.
Cool.
Well, the people are probably sick of hearing about us because they know Andrew's going to be on in a couple of minutes.
Right.
So
let's go on for a long time. Well, no, I guess not. People just fast forward.
They've already hit the play at twice the speed button. No.
It's funny. We did a test one podcast. Like if you were at the end of the podcast, let us tweeted us, right? We got a lot of tweets, so thank you for everyone who tweeted us and sticking around to the end of the podcast. I appreciate it. I'm
not going to ask people to tweet us if they heard this because I don't want to find out that nobody listens to our introductions. So we'll just take a quick little break and we'll get to the main event. We'll get Mr. Andrew Brokos in here, and that's it. So we'll take a break, come back with some strategy on the Tournament Poker Edge podcast.
If you are looking for the best MTT training site on the planet, look no further than TournamentPokerEdge.com. Tournament Poker Edge focuses exclusively on multi-table tournaments and features some of the best live and online pros. No waiting through cash game videos looking for the occasional tournament video. Tournament Poker Edge also offers strategy articles, forums, a member chat room, and much more. So visit TournamentPokerEdge.com and start taking your game to the next level now.
Welcome back to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. Time to bring in today's pro, and it's been a long time coming that we get this gentleman on the call. So thank you, Andrew, for coming on. We definitely appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to having a chance to talk to TPE in a slightly more informal setting. I feel like a lot of people have people might have watched some of my videos and had a chance to find out how I think about poker strategy, but I haven't really had a lot of opportunity just to talk like people with the people.
Yeah.
You talk to yourself a lot in regards to TPE. And he got so tired of it that he started his own podcast.
And I do. I have little conversations with myself in my videos. I ask myself questions and I answer them. And
well, if you don't know Andrew's podcast, Thinking Poker Podcast, if you enjoy this podcast, you'll certainly enjoy Andrew's podcast because it takes strategy, I think, to an even higher level. The banter between him and Nate is fantastic, and I enjoy it. I put it on, and I think a lot of people put on this podcast as another form of training, and you certainly could do that with the Thinking Poker Podcast. It's a great podcast, Andrew.
I think, it's funny because when we started it, we really were interested in the interview side of things, and that's when we have guests on the show, a lot of times we don't even talk strategy with them. I mean, it's great when we can get a good player on and have a chance to talk strategy, but a lot of times we just do the strategy stuff, just myself and my co-host Nate. Yeah. And with the guests, we really like to have like conversations with people and just get like different takes on poker, or talk about stuff that doesn't necessarily come up on other poker podcasts. So for us, it was like the interviews were kind of the thing that we're most interested in, and the talking strategy was we kind of looked at as the sugar that helps the medicine go down, in terms of like we didn't think a lot of people, or not as many people would listen to a show that was just pure interview. So I still tend to think like, because it's a lot like the most work for the show is lining up guests, as I'm sure you guys encounter with your podcast as well.
Absolutely.
And so I'm always kind of like, anytime I get sort of lazy about lining up guests, I'm like, oh, we've done a couple episodes recently where it's just been me and Nate, or it's just been Nate and me and someone who's kind of like a regular feature on the show. We haven't really had like a big headlining interview in a while. And I realize like me and Nate are probably the only people who care about that, and most of our listeners are probably like happy to have more strategy heavy episodes, but I always feel like I'm letting them down.
I think you guys are really good at both sides of things, and a couple come to mind. Specifically, obviously the Carlos Welch interviews, I think everyone, I mean, I could tell just from your commenting on it in podcast, people must love that podcast. It seems to be
what's not to love about Carlos?
Exactly.
That's really, Loxy for TP years. That's TP's very own Loxy, Carlos Welch.
The first time we interviewed him actually was, this was the show that he was on from TPE, right?
He was on our sort of sister show called TPE Live, which is just basically less strategy and more just kind of BSing around the table.
When we're together somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Nate and I, Carlos is one of the only interviews that we've done in person, like all three of us in the same place when we were in Las Vegas, and we met him during a meetup that we had for the Thinking Poker podcast. And then there was maybe like 2 hours between when we first met Carlos and then when he was going to come up to the hotel room to do the interview. And in that time, I listened to his interview on the TPE show. So I already had, I mean, just the second you meet Carlos, you're like, oh, this guy's going to make for a good interview. He's just like extremely funny and charismatic. But then listening to him on your show, I was like, holy shit, this guy is like perfect. Like just the stories of him like sleeping in the van, and I was like, this guy is like Nick S material.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a great guy, so it's just nice to have him around. He's just a really, really nice guy. That one was great. Isaac Haxton was fantastic. I mean, put you guys with Ike, it must, it kind of hurts my brain to think about the conversation there, but that was a great interview. How was it interviewing him?
He was actually one of the trickier interviews, and he was extremely generous in terms of, he gave us a lot of time. He answered whatever we asked him. He just needed more prompting, I think, than some people did. Like, he didn't give real long answers. So we were really happy with the outcome, and it was definitely, I mean, continues to be one of our most popular shows, and with good reason. But it was a little less conversational than some of our shows, and it felt a little more like work on my part, where I really had to be thinking constantly, like, what do I need to ask him to get him to say interesting things? Because he was perfectly willing to say them. He just needed to be prompted.
Yeah.
Right. What, I mean, you've obviously been around poker, and I think you started out a lot more with blogging in terms of, you started out as a poker player, but kind of blogging and writing was sort of your first foray into non-at-the-table things, I think. What made you want to start a podcast, and then has it kind of turned into what you expected it to, or is it morphed into something a little bit different than what you anticipated?
The impetus for the podcast, I guess, was just wanting to have, poker is such a man or a dog eat dog, every man for himself sort of pursuit. Hopefully there aren't too many people eating other people in the poker room. So it's such a dog eat dog pursuit, and I think it's kind of nice to find ways of doing things that are more being like in cooperative relationships with other poker players. Obviously, you don't want to be doing that in a collusive sort of way at the tables, but I mean, I think coaching is nice for that. Making videos is nice for that, and you're doing a podcast with someone who's Nate and I really weren't great friends until we started doing the podcast together. We would see each other like once or twice a year during the WSOP, so it was nice just to have an impetus to talk to him. I think that's one of the things you realize as you get older is like friendships aren't just automatic. You have to like talk to people, and at least for me, I kind of don't. But it's like when you're like in school, your friends are just kind of like the people who sit next to you in class or whatever. But,
right.
I don't know. Like I don't usually just like up and call people for no reason. So it's nice like actually having an impetus to talk to someone who I think we both agree like we would like to talk more often, but neither of us is really just gonna like make a phone call and be like, hey, how's it going? So I mean, having an impetus to like talk to him and then also to talk to so many other interesting people in the poker world. And we've kind of joked that Tommy Angelo was like the reason we just to like have an excuse to talk to Tommy Angelo. And then, you know, whether or not we ever did any more episodes after Tommy Angelo, who was our second interview, we were just thinking, well, you know, that at least we had a chance to talk to Tommy Angelo, and now you can throw in, I mean, we had any number of really interesting people on the show. And actually, I'll drop an exclusive on here. This is a show that'll be coming out in about a week and a half. I don't know. When is this going to air?
This will probably go up tomorrow morning.
Yeah, so about a week and a half, Mike McDonald is going to be on our show.
Ooh, that's going to be great.
Nice.
It was a really fantastic interview. That's one to look forward to for sure.
Did you ask him about the stare?
We did not.
Have you heard about that?
I've seen his stare.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of talk about this. Like, he introduced this new stare at TCA that a lot of people were talking about. I didn't even see the live coverage, but that's what I saw a lot of people tweeting about his stare. That's funny.
I do think that's an important thing, actually. Your look. I mean, it's really intimidating to play with someone who has a good stare, and I think it can kind of unhinge your opponents. It certainly makes you harder to read, but I also think it, in some cases, makes your opponents easier to read for you. And if you really have a lot of confidence in your stare, I think that it makes, I mean, for me anyway, I feel more comfortable staring at people, and therefore I'm more likely to get information from them when if I feel not confident, then I'm less likely to like look at somebody because I'm afraid I'm going to give away something. So when I'm really feeling like I'm in a confident place, then I can stare somebody down and feel like I'm winning the information more, like I'm getting more out of that contest of gazes than he or she is.
Contest of gazes, I like that. That's going to be the subtitle for this podcast.
That'll be my new video series.
A theory series on gazes.
Yeah, that would be a tricky thing to do via without a camera fixed on.
Yeah. I really liked your Ed Miller interview as well, although I have one gripe about it. I listened to it on the way to the World Series, to my flight to the World Series last year, and it was so great that I immediately downloaded Playing the Player. I think that's the name of his book, right? Yeah, and read it on the plane. And I think it's a big mistake to try to read something that theoretical and try to put it into action right away in bigger tournaments and more important situations. That kind of threw my game off. So just a little quirk there, but it drove me to download his book and buy it because I just love the conversation you had with him. He's really great interview. I would assume, and easy to talk to. He seems like a nice guy.
Yeah, all those things are true. And I'd never met him in person, but then during the WSOP 2013, the most recent one, we had dinner together, and I was planning on buying him dinner, but he ended up insisting on buying since he insisted on going to a vegan restaurant. Super nice, very generous guy, and hopefully he's someone we'll have on again soon. We don't have specific plans for that, but I think it's unlikely that he would say no anytime we asked him to come back. But yeah, I agree, that was one of our best.
Yeah. So for people so a lot of people know your podcast, but I'm not sure how many people know your background. Do you want to give us a little bit into how you got into poker and how you came up and how this all started for you?
Yeah, gladly. I guess I really started playing poker in college, kind of around what people would call the moneymaker boom, which I used to say that's like when everyone started, but I guess that's starting to get less true. And we did an interview recently with Ryan, who's a TPE member, Ryan Van Sanford.
Yep.
And he just started like a year or two. Because I think there's like more and more people now who have started post moneymaker boom. But it used to be that everyone had started at that time. Like anyone who was a serious poker player had started around then. Yeah. So that was about when I started, and I was in college during that time. So my roommate and I got into playing poker, and there was this dorm tournament. I think it was $10 to enter, and we'd play twice a week. I don't know how people got away with this because it was just openly hosting. I mean, no reg was being taken, but they were openly having a poker tournament in a dorm lounge twice a week.
There's a lot worse things that happen in dorms, so I'm sure they were happy. I'm sure they were happy they were just playing poker.
But like that was my impetus for doing any kind of like studying poker. It was just like I really wanted to win this dorm tournament, and that led me to read like the Super System. I guess there weren't really too many poker books out at that time, but it led me to read Super System anyway, which then, I instantly started like through that calling it off with 5-6 suited because,
suited connectors.
Right. But I mean, that was like how I initially sort of got interested in it, and then I started playing free roll. I was very nitty about ever putting my own money online. I had no idea like what sites could be trusted. I assumed none of them could be trusted, and they were all going to take my money at the first opportunity. So I was like only doing free rolls and trying to build up a little bit of roll that way, which I would occasionally get some, and then I would just turn right around and lose it immediately. So I can't claim it's one of those stories where I just like never made a deposit and ran it all up from a free roll. Basically, I got comfortable enough with certain sites from playing their free rolls and then like having a balance in my account for a little while. Sometimes I was able to cash out something before I went broke. So eventually I got comfortable making a deposit on Pacific Poker.
Well, in retrospect, you were right about most of them not being trustworthy about taking your money.
There were actually more trustworthy ones. I mean, because that was like when you could play on Pacific and Party, and I mean, obviously in retrospect, like UB and Full Tilt didn't turn out so well, but so I graduated from college with a degree in philosophy, which kind of limited my career prospects. And I had actually been working. I actually was offered a full-time job in Chicago because I had been working. I went to the University of Chicago, and I had been working with a nonprofit organization that ran like a competitive debate league in the like an after-school program, basically in the Chicago public schools. So they offered me a full-time job when I graduated, but which really is not a smart thing for a philosophy major to turn down. But my girlfriend was living in Boston at the time, and we had been doing like a long-distance relationship for 3 years. So I ended up moving to Boston instead, and I was like trying to find work in the nonprofit sector, which was like what I was interested in. And these jobs are just the jobs I was applying for were just like awful. I mean, it's kind of like pamphleteering or the kind of people who like stand on the streets and ask for money for this or that organization. It was like that kind of stuff that I was applying for, and I wasn't even like getting callbacks for that kind of thing. So like not only were they jobs, I mean, they were jobs I didn't even want, that I was like overqualified for, and I also wasn't getting, for whatever reason, I wasn't even like really getting an opportunity to apply for them. So I was feeling kind of crappy about that, but I was making I don't know, maybe like $50 a week playing poker. But I was also like pretty actively trying to get better at poker. And as I discovered things like 2+2, I realized, well, there are people who really are making pretty serious money playing poker. And it seems like I might be able to make enough money playing poker, even if I'm not playing quite full time, that I could just kind of start the nonprofit organization that I'm interested in instead of trying to find like a shitty job with somebody else's.
Right.
It's okay for me to say shitty, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
We've had Big Dog and Danny N13 on here, so don't worry about it.
I know you guys have more than one podcast, so I wasn't sure if like one of them was the more family friendly show or something. I've definitely heard plenty of profanity being on TPE podcast before. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, but we're good. Say what you want. Go for it. If you don't say it on Thinking Poker Podcast, maybe this is your outlet. Unleash a stream of profanities. Go for it, Andrew.
So I basically started a similar organization in the Boston Public Schools, one that was similar to what I had been doing in Chicago before, like an after-school competitive debate program. And my thinking was, if that ever really takes off and gets to the point where we convince the Boston Public Schools to invest in it, and we get like some foundations to invest in it, and if it ever gets to the point where it's like a real nonprofit and not just something that I'm doing in my spare time, then that can be my job, is like running that organization. And until then, poker can help me to make ends meet and maybe even give me a little leftover money to invest in the organization. So I did that for about 4 years. I guess that would be like 2004 until 2008. And eventually the organization did actually get to the point where we were ready to hire a full-time executive director. But by then, poker was going so much better than I ever could have anticipated that it would in 2004, that I wasn't necessarily looking to have a full-time job. Yeah. And to be honest, I wasn't necessarily the most qualified person to run the organization either. I mean, I had experience working in education, but I'd never actually been a teacher. I was still relatively young. So we did end up hiring a full-time person who was not me to take over the organization. And he's really done a fantastic job with it. It's grown quite a bit since I left. I don't have a whole lot to do with it anymore other than like cutting them a check once a year and occasionally going out to volunteer when there's something that they especially need my help with. But
I mean, I think first of all, I mean, it was really impressive for you as as a young person right out of school to take the initiative and do that. I think that's amazing. And one thing I've seen in my life in startup world is that it's definitely a different person to take an organization from 0 to 60 and then from 60 to 100. Like the person that you brought in to run it probably couldn't get it off the ground to start with. It's just a different skill set, so it makes sense that someone else comes in after you give birth to it because it's really a different type of personality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's really, really, really impressive.
So why are you still running TPA?
That's why we're still at 60.
Yeah. As the guys know, I don't really do anything. I just make noise. I just make noise on Skype management calls. Actually, I mean, for TPE, it's funny because we did build it like at night on weekends, and we were talking about this last night. We really did have that true startup mentality. It was, let's just start making something and start refining it as time goes by, and we get reaction from people, and put in just a foot in the pedal and start moving. So it does have that characteristic. So maybe Andrew's right. Maybe we should go hire a professional CEO and get rid of me and you, Derek.
Maybe Andrew's available.
I do think that I call it momentum, but that idea of just like starting something and starting to do it is, I mean, that's always anything that I've done in my life that's been successful has not been a matter of me like planning it out and saying, okay, first I'm going to take this step and then I'm going to take that step and like laying all the groundwork first. Because I thought about taking that approach with the Boston Debate League, and it's like basically taking a full year to try to put some infrastructure in place before I started doing any programming, and eventually I decided like, well, hey, that's no fun. Like the fun part is working with the students. So I wanted to like start doing that right away, and I also thought, well, maybe if we can demonstrate the value of the program, then that'll help to attract versus like me just showing up as a 21-year-old like recent college graduate and part-time professional poker player and being like, no, really, this organization is going to do some good things.
It's going to be awesome.
$100,000. To just start doing it, and best case scenario, it really takes off, and even if it doesn't, at least you've done something worthwhile in the short term. I mean, I was working with maybe only like 20 students or something the first year, but at least like those 20 students are a little bit better off than they would have been, and if it really turns into something great. But
and that momentum is the right word too, because once you start, like you just start doing more, like it becomes more natural to do the next thing. Inertia is really like the biggest thing to get over when you start something new, and the action of actually finishing something encourages you to do the next thing, and it builds upon it, and you learn a lot about what you should be doing next. It's really hard to plan for everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, so you don't even know like what you're going to need ultimately.
Yeah, you don't know what the variables are. You just kind of have to do it and then react as you do it. But then you have something at the end, like, and I think Bill Gates said this, but people overestimate what they can do in the short term, but they underestimate what they can do in the long term. And so you just kind of have to do stuff, and even and just keep moving. And then when you look back 3, 6 months, a year, like, wow, we actually made a business, right? Yeah. And it's, even though it feels like it's not enough is happening, if you're continually going, good things happen. So, yep.
And so I will say one of the first people who I approached to like join our board to be like a person other than me who would care about the organization, I kind of explained this plan to her, and she was helpful in a lot. Not that there's any chance she's going to hear this, but she was helpful in a lot of ways. But when I told her this plan of like, well, I'm just going to kind of get it started and do the programming first, and then hopefully that'll convince the Boston Public Schools to invest in it. Not that they're going to be the only funders, but that they would, they're a pretty significant funder now. It's the only time I've ever seen someone like non-ironically do a spit take. Like she was drinking water and she was just like spat it out, and it's just 100% genuine. Like she was like, good luck with that. So she did decline to join the board, but it happened. Like the Boston Public Schools really did buy into it, and they've invested over a couple of years, probably close to $1 million in the Boston Debate League now. So joke's on her.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
But it was the same thing with the podcast too, where, like I was saying, I mean, Nate and I were just like, well, we like talking to each other. We know a couple of interesting people who will come on the show for sure. Shane Schlager was one of our actually, he was our very first guest. So like, we know a couple of people who will definitely come on the show, and then we'll just see what happens. Like, maybe people will find it, maybe people will like it, maybe people will agree to be on the show, and maybe we'll continue to make time for it. Maybe none of those things will happen, but no matter what, we'll put out a little bit of interesting content. We'll have some conversations that we enjoy that hopefully other people will enjoy as well. And the value of it is not contingent on what happens in the future. You're banking a little bit. It's like a semi-bluff. Like you're banking a little bit on it paying off big in the end, but there's still you value even if that doesn't happen.
That's awesome. I have 2 questions about Nate. Is Nate the Nate from 2+2 that used to just sign his post Nate period? Is that Nate, or is it different?
Yeah, it probably is Nate period, because he actually got banned from 2+2. He had a different screen name, and he got banned from 2+2 for just one of Mason Nami's petty tirades. So he got banned, and then he rejoined as Nate with a period. But he used to be like Nate with a couple of numbers after it.
Okay, I think that is. I think I remember. I think that's him. Did he have a Denver? Did he have
Yes.
John Elway?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you, because I remember that. I could never make the connection if that was him.
It's funny too. Do you know what Nate looks like?
No, I do not know what Nate looks like. I have a visual picture, though.
I won't be offended by that, because I think this describes me as well, but he's kind of nerdy looking. But the thing is, for a long time, I didn't know what he looked like, but I knew he had, not that I actually thought he looked like John Elway, but just you get used to seeing something with their avatar, and you associate it with that person. So that's
right.
When you do meet Nate, and he doesn't look very much like John Elway.
All right, you know what? I did look him up just now, and I have seen this picture. But yes, he does not look like John Elway. But that's how I pictured him after the podcast, pretty much. I mean, he sounds like a smart guy. Looks like a smart guy.
He's for sure a smart guy. Someone actually said when they eventually saw pictures of us, they thought that Nate looked like what they thought I would look like, and I looked like what Nate would look like. Which I think is a compliment to my appearance ultimately, because I think Nate has a really, really nice podcasting voice.
Yeah, well,
the fact that they thought that voice would be attached to my body is pretty flattering.
And that was my second question. How has he not been doing some sort of audio work in the past? Because he has the perfect radio voice. He sounds like an announcer. He sounds like a radio broadcaster.
Yeah, it's really I don't know, dick shriveling to work with him. Like, you just know no matter what. I mean, I guess on the other hand, there's it kind of demotivates me to even try, because there's no way I'm going to sound half as good as Nate does on a microphone.
Yeah, it's great. You guys make a really good team. So you left off with the debate league, but still, how did poker turn into something that became such a big part of your life and something you became so successful at? Like, what was the growth like in that regards?
I guess the blog ended up being kind of significant to it. I don't remember when exactly I started blogging, but I guess it was pretty early in my career, maybe 2 years in or so. And I've been a real active member of 2+2, which especially in the early days, the MTT community was just full of really good players, and people were probably a little more open about sharing information than they are now, because it wasn't quite so much that you were just playing against each other. I mean, you did, but there were so many other people playing as well. I think it's just a little bit more of a secret, and fewer people knew about 2+2. It was just slightly safer to discuss poker strategy there at that time. So there was a lot of really high quality poker content that was available there, and it was also, there was a big gulf between what you could get from a 2+2 versus anywhere else. This is pre-card runners, so there's no video training sites, or maybe it's real early days of card runners, but there aren't video training sites, just giving away all this valuable information for virtually nothing a month. Which, sign up for Tournament Poker Edge if you haven't already and you're listening. It's a really good value. But there's, giving away really valuable information for very, very little per month, and there's not so many books out there and things. So knowing about 2+2 really gave you a big edge, and that helped a lot. But there does get to be a point where you're not learning so much from forums anymore, because there's just fewer and fewer people you're going to be able to learn something from, or fewer and fewer things you can learn that way. And being able to teach yourself things starts to become more important, and being able to analyze your own game and figure things out for yourself. So I mean, I've always enjoyed writing, and the blog was kind of an impetus for me to I mean, I really had no one knew who I was other than like members of 2+2 at the time, so I didn't have an expectation of like having a lot of readers. It was mostly just an impetus for me to review every session that I did. You know, I initially my intention was to post at least one hand from every session that I played, which I would maybe play 4 days a week or something. I've never been a person who put in like real big hours. I mean, if I averaged 15 hours a week over the course of a year, that was a good year. Of actual playing. I mean, studying and stuff counts too.
Right.
So for me, like 4 times a week, I'm making a blog post, I'm posting a hand, I'm posting my thoughts on it, and I mean, I guess word of mouth or whatever spread around a little bit. So like some people from 2+2 knew that it was there, and it just just over the course of a couple of years of doing that consistently. But it started as something that I was doing for myself once again, and then it just got momentum. And then some people did start to find it, and I started writing for 2+2 magazine, and it led to some more writing opportunities from there.
Do I have the justified brag of being your first coaching student?
You do.
Yeah, right. I'm so glad. So I'll tell that story. So Andrew and I do go back a bit in that regard. So I in 2000, I don't know if it was 2006 or 2007, probably 2007.
I don't think I was coaching as early as 2007.
Yeah. I had found 2+2 in 2006, and everything Andrew said is 100% right. I mean, you have Sean Deeb and Charter and Andrew. I mean, the list goes on of the people who were posting in MTT community.
Yeah, I didn't even bother trying to make a list because there's just so many.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the first couple people that come to mind. And I remember like printing out a post from Clayton about like the stages of MTT.
I remember that one. Yeah.
You remember that one? Like I remember like printing that out and carrying it with me to work and reading it on breaks and stuff. And like it just like there was such an edge to be gained from being at that place at that time. And so I definitely confirm that. But so I was at 2+2 2006, and around 2007, I think I just put a post out there. Hey, I'm thinking of doing coaching. Anyone interested? To that effect, I think. Interested in getting coaching. Anyone interested? And I swear to God, Andrew, I was hoping you would respond. It was so weird. I don't know why. We never talked before, but I really liked your style of posting, and you wrote back saying, hey, I'm thinking of doing coaching. Let's do a trial session. So first of all, thank you for responding to me and giving me that trial session. And then I went on and did a full coaching session schedule with you. And for like 3 years before people really started to catch up, I mean, the stuff that I learned in those 10 hours put me ahead of way ahead of the curve. Like 2007 to 2010 were like beautiful years online, and especially in MTTs, because the things that you learn there, like there was just such a gulf between good players and bad players then. Obviously things have changed since Black Friday, but yeah, okay, I'm glad to have that justified brag because I could wear that like a badge.
Well, I'm glad you found it helpful, but I will say your success was frustrating to me because you and I talked a couple times about staking, and I think it happened on 2 different occasions that we had like agreed to terms and what you were going to be playing and to a start date, and then like a couple days before that start date, you had like a really significant win, and you're like, I don't need staking anymore. And then like so we did that once, and then you decided you wanted to move up in stakes, and you were ready to talk about staking again, and we talked about it again and worked things out. And we're going to start on March 1st or whatever, and then February 20th you win something else big, and you're like, never mind, I'm not staking.
I remember both of those times. The first time I won the nightly 109. I guess it was like 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. Twice in 1 week, and I was like, all right, Andrew, thank you for all the great advice and the coaching, and sorry you're not making money on this one. And then I think the next time it was the nightly 100K. Little brags there, more brags for me on this podcast. But yeah,
finally, I got my chance though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
April 1st, 2011. We decided we're going to start some coaching. I transfer some money to your PokerStars account and to your Full Tilt Poker account.
You run bad with me.
Yeah, and I end up with like an extra. I don't even remember how much it is. Like it's like an extra $10,000 or something stuck on Full Tilt. That I wouldn't have otherwise had on there. So,
although on Black Friday, I just play. I had it open and I was able to stay online, and I played, and I final tabled 3 things, and I ended up with another like 2,000 in my account, and they let me keep it. So I don't know. Hopefully, no one does anything about that after hearing this. But I ended up with more in my account on Black Friday than I probably should have. So we ran good in that regard.
Hopefully, I'll be seeing that money soon.
You should be. I got the confirmation it's coming. So
yeah, it's looking good.
Yeah, it is looking good. It is looking good. Yeah.
Pretty exciting.
So a nod to exactly what you said about poker in that time period. It definitely was a golden age, and there was 2+2 was the place to be. So you were there. How did you turn that early conversation we had about coaching into sort of the personality that you have in poker now? And I mean, I know the podcast is a big part of it, but what is coaching like for you? What has it been like since Black Friday? Those types of things after the initial rush and easy times.
I don't even remember how I found my first coaching students. I guess I just put up a thing on my blog. Maybe there was a place you could advertise on 2+2. I never paid for advertising. #NickCast, but I don't even know how I advertised the first ones, but yeah, I mean, I did coaching for a couple of years, and I mean, I think I was helpful to those people, but I didn't have a real fully formed philosophy of coaching. I just sort of talk to them about poker, which I think is all that most coaches ever do anyway. But it's something that I've always taken very seriously, precisely because I've been sort of I've never actually hired a coach myself, and just because I'm kind of nitty about these things. And I think that if I knew that there would be a coach who was as dedicated to their students as I would be, or as I am, I would be a lot more likely to hire them. But I feel like I'd constantly be wondering. I feel like there's so many people who do coaching just kind of half-heartedly, and are just I don't know, I guess I can look at your hands and talk to you about poker for some stuff. And so I've always kind of taken my relationship with my students very seriously and tried to think about how I could be most helpful to them. So over a couple of years, I'd kind of evolved a coaching style that I think was pretty helpful and was very sort of Socratic and designed to help students learn things, kind of realize things for themselves. So I was kind of guiding their learning more so than just telling them a bunch of facts that they might or might not remember or might not really know how to put into practice. And I expected that that Black Friday was going to be a big hit to my coaching business, or my American business, which was probably 2/3 of my students were Americans. And I did lose most of the American students that I had. I mean, I gave people the opportunity to have refunded unused coaching if they weren't going to be playing poker seriously anymore, which many people took me up on. But I actually got a lot of new American students also, and it's kind of ended up better than ever. Because what ended up happening was all these online players started showing up in poker rooms, people who had never really bothered to go to poker rooms before. And so live games got a lot harder. Yeah. And there were a lot of not professionals necessarily, but pretty serious amateurs, people who maybe own small businesses, or you guys know the kind of people who play, the kind of non-professionals who play live poker. And there were people who were accustomed to being competitive in those games, maybe even winning a little bit in the games that they were playing. They weren't they were crushers, they weren't professionals, but they were accustomed to making a bit of money playing 2-5 at their local casino. And suddenly the games got a lot harder, and there's these kids in there who are free betting them light, and they're just kind of doing all this stuff, and the guys are I don't really know what's going on, but I know that I'm getting outplayed, and they wanted someone to help them with that. And I think that's a place where the kind of brand that I established for myself ended up being really helpful, because these aren't guys who have a deep background in poker theory. They might not have ever read 2+2 or watched a coaching video, or maybe they've read a poker book, but they're not familiar with a lot of the jargon. And I think I'm able to work with them in a not condescending way. I can just only imagine some of the conversations that I've had with some of my students. It's really hard for me to imagine a lot of other poker professionals I guess not being condescending in those same situations. When you realize someone doesn't understand the concept of equity, and you're I'm going to have to, I think a lot of people, even if they didn't mean to be condescending, just wouldn't even know where to start with that. How do I talk to someone who doesn't understand equity? So, the fact that I've had a lot of experience teaching, even outside of poker, I mentioned, doing a lot of work in education, not just with students, but, I've also done a decent bit of, teaching teachers how to teach their students, and I have kind of a deeper background in education than I think a lot of poker players do, and so that enabled me to be a help to these guys, and they make great students. students because, I mean, professionals are really concerned about, it's hard to teach something to a professional. Like, they already know a lot about poker. So it's really great when you can get someone who is a very smart person, a very driven person, but not someone who's had a lot of exposure to poker theory, because they learn very quickly. They're able to make progress with you very quickly. And it's not real demanding on my part. Like, I'm not necessarily teaching them stuff that's like the cutting edge of poker theory. It's stuff that I know really, really well and I'm really confident in. So I feel like I can, it's not too demanding on my part. They get a lot out of it. It just ends up being a great situation.
Yeah, I'm sure your coaching style has evolved since we did those lessons several years ago. But I mean, just from that time, I will say that I love the fact that you made me think about, why I'm doing something as opposed to just teaching me what to do.
That's what they call it, thinking poker.
Exactly. Perfect branding. Because I recall you give me homework and you'd ask me to kind of think about, what. I can't remember all the exact examples, but I recall literally getting out paper and writing down what hands writing out ranges for the first time. Okay, I'm gonna do this because I think that this is what he, the range that he potentially has, and actually think about the range as opposed to just kind of, give myself a hot, warm, cold, feel, and write that out, and then that builds the intuition. I think over once you start practicing that, your intuition gets better and it builds the intuition. But thinking through all the reasons why, I remember even just the first time. I recall there was a conversation we had about raising to, I remember that we were talking about a hand that was blinds 75, 150, and you explained I don't need to raise to 450. This is how early it was, right? You were you don't need to raise to 450 because what you do for 450 will, 450 will have the same effect as probably 325 in this situation. And I was oh, you're absolutely right. That think instead of just doing 3x everyone else is doing, think about what will make him, influence the actions that I want to happen, was really helpful. So I'm sure your style has evolved. I'm sure it's still based on that. How would you say your style is different now from when you started? What have you learned about coaching and what have you changed? I'm
actually surprised that I was giving you homework. I don't remember doing that.
I think I asked you for things to work on. I don't remember if I asked you or
it was a good thing to ask for because that's the biggest thing that I've added now is I've just increasingly formalized the because I've just found that most people, I end up working on the same things with most people, and the starting point is different. But these are things that have also been the subject of a lot of my TPE videos, and my coaching now is kind of integrated with those videos. So the idea is that if we're going to work on hand reading, I'll tell people, go watch my hand reading series, practice those things, and then come to me. And basically we'll, the one-on-one coaching starts where the hand reading series on TPE leaves off. Right. So the TPE videos are part of the homework.
Right.
And so that's, among other things, it saves people a lot of money because they can watch for free stuff that, rather than paying me, by the hour to tell them those things. So it's integrated there, but then I also now have actual homework assignments that I give people where it's here's a hand, and it's basically a worksheet that walks through a hand and asks a bunch of questions that are what you should be asking yourself during the hand. So it'll say what range do you think he has when he raises pre-flop? Now we see the flop. How well do you think this flop interacts with his range?
Yeah.
How well does it interact with your range? What should your value target be? What should your value plan be? Okay, now that you bet and he calls, how does that change his range? Now we see the turn card. How does this change your plan? What should you do now? Just it's basically step by step, because this is the biggest thing that people usually ask me for is kind of what's the thought process I should be going through, or that's
right.
Thought process is what I try to focus on, not just in my coaching, but really in my TPE videos as well. I've done these big series on hand reading, on value betting. I've got the one on bluffing that's going up right now. And what I try to give people is a rubric for thinking through these things, rather than just saying, because you're never going to play the same hand twice. So to look back in retrospect, and maybe it helps you sleep better at night to know to answer that nagging question of what I should have done in that situation. But realistically, what you're really concerned about is not what you should have done in that situation, but what can I learn from that situation that will be useful to me in future situations. So a lot of the coaching focuses on trying to figure out things that people already know and understand and do well, how to apply those things to other situations that they're less comfortable with.
I think the homework was a primitive form of the how does the flop impact his range as we thought it was, and then how does the turn impact his range and that leads me to, I think what's my favorite video of yours on TPE is what's the title of the one where you talk about how does he play his monsters, how does he play his draws, and how does he play his air, and you go through that whole thought process. That's the hand. Okay, it's the hand reading system. So can you explain that for the listeners? Because I think that's a great way. If you're not a TP member, you should join first of all. but not for the shameless plug there. This series is one of the best on TP. So if you could just explain that concept of the monsters, draws, and air and thought process, that'd be great.
It's basically a simplified method of hand reading. So a lot of people. Hand reading is a very intimidating idea, especially if you're thinking of it in kind of like Daniel Negreanu terms, where you're thinking that you should be able to call your opponent's exact hand and say, like, he has exactly this. That's really not the goal of hand reading. And I think I go with hand reading because it's such an established term. But what you're really interested in is range reading. You're just trying to get a sense of, like, what are the hands this guy would play that way. And in fact, a lot of times the specific hand isn't even that important. Quite often, whether he has aces or kings isn't terribly important. Often, it may even be the case that, like, whether he has top pair or a set isn't really important, or top pair or a flush isn't really important.
Right.
It's just a matter of you kind of, at least as a starting point, and there is room to refine this further, and there are advantages to be had from refining this further. But as a starting point, I think it can be useful just to get a kind of a broad sense of what sort of hand your opponent has. And in general, I think that a lot of people tend to treat their hands, and not without good reason, a lot of players tend to treat their hands as falling into one of three categories. There are like monster hands, which are often hands that people are willing to get all in with, especially in tournaments when you're not that deep. But in any event, they're hands that people want to play big pots with, whether or not it's actually an all-in pot. Like people actively want to put money into the pot when they have a monster hand. And then there are hands that have no showdown value, there is kind of an important distinction between draws versus hands that don't connect with the board at all, but they both share the characteristic that they're not very likely to win unless they improve. So they're both hands with which people would prefer to have fold equity. Like they're your number one priority when you don't have any chance of winning at showdown unless you improve is it should be trying to make your opponent fold if that's a realistic thing to do, but it should be on your mind anyway. So there's like that category of hands that don't have showdown value. And then there are marginal hands, which are hands that people are usually, they think there's a good chance they have the best hand, but they don't want to play a big pot with it. And so they're trying to get it to showdown cheaply. And there's differences in the way people will play these hands. So usually a lot of aggression will indicate either a monster hand or a bluff, but is not very likely to indicate a marginal hand. There are certain players who overestimate or put too much importance on protecting their hand, and so in those cases they might really go crazy when they just flop top pair. But in general, when people have a marginal hand, they're trying to keep the pot small, and so when your opponent does something to indicate that he's keeping the pot small, that will be an indication that he doesn't have a monster, versus when he does something to, he has a choice of keeping the pot small and he chooses not to, he's telling you that he has a monster. So, regardless of which monster he has, it's not really important if you have something like top pair, top kicker. A lot of times, I think people will overvalue a hand like that or feel like they have to pay off a river bet because they're like, well, I have top pair, top kicker. How can I fold for one bet on the river after the turn checked through?
Right.
But, if you think that your opponent is not going to bet a marginal hand, which is, you can beat marginal hands and you can beat bluffs, but you can't beat monsters. So if in a situation where your opponent wouldn't bet a marginal hand, which many people don't, a lot of poker players are overly passive, especially on the river. They like, especially in live poker, they really like to see showdowns. So if it's they wouldn't bet a marginal hand, then either they're bluffing or they have a monster, and you can try to figure out how often they're bluffing. But again, passive players probably don't bluff as much as you might be inclined to think they do. And you can really make a lot of money even without having a very good idea of what exactly your opponent has, just by realizing, well, I can really only beat a bluff here, and I don't think he's bluffing all that often, so even though my hand seems strong, I'm going to fold it.
Yep. And I enjoyed during that series where you actually took the notepad out and put together the ranges for each of the categories, the hands that you think that fall in each category, and then as the hand went on, you were able to eliminate hands because they wouldn't have done that if they had one of those hands. They, if they, it just doesn't match the pattern. And then you were able to get a much clearer hand range read by the end of the hand. And what I liked about that is, I did that for a long time after, for like at least 3 weeks, when I was playing. And it definitely, like, writing it out definitely helps you, internalize it and make it part of your intuition when you're playing, and helps you clarify your thought process when you're playing later on, because the engagement of multiple senses, I think, really helps you.
Well, it shows you also that you should be hand reading all along. I mean, I think one of the big mistakes a lot of people make is they wait until they have a big decision. Like often they're facing like a river shove or something,
right,
and then they decide they're going to start trying to read the hand at that point. And so they say, well, a flush draw, maybe like a backdoor flush draw came in. So like, there was only one club on the flop, but then clubs came on the turn and river and your opponent shoves. And so people will be inclined to say like, well, I guess he has a flush. And if all you only do your hand reading on the river, you might miss the fact that, in fact, this player called a bet on the flop, and
right,
that really that greatly limits the number of 2 club combinations he could have in his hand.
Right.
So, and also like hand reading matters not just when you have a big decision, but something I try to emphasize in my other series, like in my Getting Paid series, is even when you're sure you have the best hand, even when you have the nuts, like hand reading isn't just about figuring out whether or not you have the best hand. Like you want to have an idea of what kind of hand your opponent has, so that you know what to do with the nuts. Like,
right,
if I think my opponent has a monster when I have the nuts, then I want to fast play it. If I think my opponent has air, then I want to try to induce bluffs. If I think he has a marginal hand, then I want to maybe give him a chance to improve or try to represent a bluff myself. But really, every single decision that you make, which it sounds obvious when you say it, like every decision you make is a better decision if you have an idea of what cards your opponent has. And that's really what people are talking about when they talk about playing the situation or playing the opponent, rather than just looking at your own cards and saying, well, I bet because I had top pair, or I bluffed because my flush missed. Like actually having a clear idea of what your opponent has, that should inform every single play that you make, not just the big decisions. And one of my pet peeves is when I see people talk about standard plays as though like there's like nothing to discuss because they had top pair, so of course they bet.
Right.
Andrew, I have a couple of questions. One related to the coaching conversation, and I'm kind of curious on your reaction to people who are super critical of professional poker players or good poker players doing coaching or making videos for a training site. You see people posting forums, these guys are just making the fish good, they're killing poker. What's your take on that as somebody who's done videos and coaching?
I think that's ridiculous. I mean, the internet exists. You can't just keep information quiet. I think that's just like someone's going to do it. The information is going to get out there one way or another. I don't think people are under any obligation. Like I don't see why I have an obligation to other poker players who already know this stuff that's bigger than my obligation to people who don't know this stuff but would like to.
Right.
Great point.
Yeah, like I just think that's a stupid argument, frankly.
You just can't control it. I mean, there's nothing you could do. You can't stop it by wishing it gone. So you just have to ride the wave.
Yeah, drives me insane. My other question, and I don't know if this is a badge of honor for you or just a mark of incredible frustration, but you've made a bunch of incredible runs in the World Series main event. It's kind of one of the things that you're sort of known for. I forget the number, but something like 6 out of 7 or something ridiculous.
I've cashed, I think, 5 times in 8 years.
Wow.
But 3 of those were top 100 finishes. Which certainly is a badge of honor. I mean, something that I'm obviously very proud of, and it has been very good for my bankroll.
Yeah, and my question related to that is, what is it about your style that you think lends so well to going deep in that event, or is it that your style is just good at going deep in every event? I won't say. I will answer the question, but I feel like it has to be prefaced with a huge. It's tournament poker, and there's a ton of variance, and I think it's pretty dangerous to say like, oh, this guy, had a string of good cashes, he must be doing something right. Right. That just logically the former does not necessarily entail the latter. Right. But it is. I mean, I do think I'm better than a lot of people who play that tournament. I do think there are certain things I do that maybe not even a lot of other professionals do that are important. I think like valuing
has kind of flipped in recent years, but for a while it was like talking about survival at all was something that like serious tournament players would look down on. If you were like, well, I'm concerned about my tournament life, that was like a fishy thing to say. I think people have come around a little bit on that now because it's something that a lot of people overvalue, and I do see that a lot on the TPE forums where people are excessively concerned about their tournament life, but it is a real thing. I mean, survival in a tournament does actually matter, especially when it's the main event where your edge is potentially very large and where there's only one opportunity a year to play it. There is something to be valued there, and I think playing at least like slightly conservative style, there's something to be said for that. But and every single one of those tournaments, obviously, there were cases where you change one river card or any one of several river cards, and I'm out without cashing. So, right. It's not hard to envision alternative universes where I'm 0-8. Well, actually, I wouldn't be 0-8 because I probably wouldn't have played the second one after whipping the first one. But, it's perfectly plausible that I wouldn't have cashed into any one of those tournaments. It's not like something that was just like fated to happen. I feel silly like saying that on a tournament podcast because I think people realize that, but I'm just wary of any attempt to like explain it just based on something about how I play.
Yeah, that makes sense. And my last question, and it's sort of off topic, but since you come from a debate background, and we won't get into the debate tonight, but did you watch the debate last night, and who won?
No, and the guy who was defending evolution.
I agree. End of that question. Cool. Did you have any other questions, Diego, before we jump into a little bit of strategy talk?
Yeah, I guess last thing is so what about post Black Friday? What are you doing now? You obviously didn't move to Canada or Costa Rica.
Well, I did for a little while.
You did, right? Okay, right.
Yeah, so I'd actually, this is like a big thing. I don't want to like go too deep into it, but it is a big thing that we didn't really address at all, which is that from the time when I hired someone else to take over the Boston Debate League, I stayed in Boston for a year past that point. It was like from 2008 to 2009. I was in Boston kind of helping with the transition, but I was no longer the director of the league. In September of 2009, my girlfriend and I left our apartment in Boston, and we didn't have a permanent residence for about 2 years after that. We were just traveling around the country and playing online poker. I was playing online poker.
That's right.
And so March of 2011, we were like, maybe we should look into getting a little more settled, and so we hadn't actually rented a place. We were renting a place month to month in Boston, but we were looking for something that we might rent longer term. And then, again, what happened shortly after that, life ended up getting turned upside down even more so than ever. So I went first to Montreal. This was because I was living in Boston at that time. So just a couple of days after Black Friday, I was thinking, maybe having a Canadian bank account will help me get money off of the sites. This is still money hasn't even come back from PokerStars yet. So I drove to Montreal and opened up a Canadian bank account. And then it was while I was in Montreal, the news that the money from PokerStars was coming back came out. But then you start to worry, wait a minute, why hasn't Full Tilt done the same thing? And why did Full Tilt give some fishy answer when? So my girlfriend didn't really like Montreal. I really like Montreal. She enjoyed visiting there, but I think not speaking French was more of an impediment than she thought it was going to be. But for a variety of reasons, we decided not to settle in Montreal. So we ended up going for a couple of months to a place called Canmore, which is near Banff National Park, kind of due north of Montana. Mm-hmm. Just an absolutely beautiful place, one of the most beautiful places I've been. So we spent a summer there, which was, I don't want to repeat myself, but just an extraordinary place to spend a summer. It's kind of like a small resort town in the Canadian Rockies. So there was pretty cool stuff to do. I would play the W Coop, and then if I finished early, you drive 10 minutes and go for a breathtaking hike. So that was a really cool place to be. And then we spent the last that was the summer of 2011, and then we spent 3 months in Vancouver. And then I just kind of got sick of needing to leave the country so much. So more recently, I've just gone to Montreal to play the W Coop for 2012 and 2013. I played the Scoop from Amsterdam 1 year. So I've traveled for specific tournaments, but I've not really been leaving the country nearly as much to play online poker. It just, I don't know, the games weren't as good. It was a pretty big hassle. And I started to enjoy live poker more. I live in Pittsburgh now, and there's a casino here. It's the first time I've ever really been to the same casino on a regular basis, and like gotten to know the other players there. And live poker is more interesting when you know the people you're playing against, I guess.
Yeah. Man, the idea of settling like in the in a small resort town, like in the mountains or whatever, playing poker seems so much better than going to like, I don't know, name any other big city, I guess, Toronto or Vancouver or something. That just sounds like the best life ever.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have been able to leave.
Yeah, well, the winter in that town would have been brutal, I think.
Yeah.
That was the impetus for
that's
leaving.
true.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a life fish move to like, you have the opportunity to live basically anywhere in the world, and you're like, I choose Toronto.
Right. No offense to the Torontoans out there.
Or even more so, like, I choose some basically retirement community for American seniors in Mexico, which is where a fair number of people ended up, and are complaining that they're bored there.
Especially, I mean, if you're going to make that big of a move, like, go big.
Yeah.
Or go cool, at least.
Yeah. I have
cool.
one last question before we go into some hands. What was it like? So for those of you who don't know Andrew's tournament resume, aside from the main events, your biggest score was an F-Tops win, right? Was it the what was it, the 2-day?
Yeah, the 2-day $2,000 tournament.
Yeah. So what was that? I mean, what was that like? Being that final table. I watched the final table as it was happening, and you seemed to be ICM effing everyone at the table. Can you walk us through like that final table real quickly, and just kind of what the situations were that you were? It seems like you were putting people in uncomfortable situations. You recognized the gravity of the situation, and with the chip position you had, you seemed to take advantage of it. What was that like?
Honestly, I don't remember a whole lot about it. I mean, it's been like
3 years, 4 years.
Yeah, over 3 years. It was like 2010.
Right.
I think it was like March of 2010 or something. So almost 4 years since that tournament. I don't remember a lot of the specifics. The one thing I do remember from three-handed was that when we were down to three-handed, it was myself, Benny Spindler, who's still has actually become an even better known person in poker since then. He's a very, very good and very, very tough, very aggressive player. So myself, Benny Spindler, and a third guy who was not Benny Spindler.
Yeah.
And therefore the less difficult of my opponents. And not Benny Spindler by a wide margin. So I really put a lot of emphasis on getting heads up with that other guy and not making it too easy for Benny to win small pots. So I was like never folding my big blind. Like, thankfully I had immediate position on him, which is extraordinarily helpful. But I was like never folding my big blind and also never fold into his C-bets. Basically I was like, if you want to take a pot from me, you're going to have to, it's going to be a ton of risk on your part to do that. Because I also, I know he's looking at it the same way.
Yeah.
He's thinking he would much rather be heads up with that guy than with me. So he would it's a really huge coup for him if he can steal my big blind, or if he can raise my big blind and then C-bet, and with pretty minimal risk to himself, just transfer a decent number of chips from my stack to his. That's a pretty great thing for him. So I wanted to make it, and then the bigger the bets that he has to get, then the more risk averse he has to be, because he also wants to avoid losing a huge pot to me. So if I can put him in a position where the best way that he can exploit me is to have to double or triple barrel bluff me. Now he's an extremely good player who's actually capable of those things. So this would have been an even more successful strategy against some other people who wouldn't have quite that same tool set. But no matter how good he is, there's just a mathematical limit to how much he wants to try to get away with, because of course I'm going to have real hands also, and I'm going to have some ability to guess what his bluffing frequency will be. And I was also not raising monster hands on the flop. So basically it was just I have an extremely wide range for calling him pre-flop and for calling his flop bet, and we'd be folding a lot of it to a turn barrel, but not all of it by any means. So it just puts him, I think, in a really difficult. It makes it very difficult for him to win substantial pots off of me. And then I think I was also trying to do what I could, although my options are more limited, to keep him from stealing the other guy's blind too much. But that's a situation where he has the button and I'm in the small blind. So my options are kind of limited there. But I definitely 3-bet him when I had the opportunity. I don't think I was ever flatting out of the small blind. I wanted to make it difficult for him to get chips generally, and some combination of that. And I think he did end up losing a flip to that other guy eventually, which was probably worth, I don't know, $80,000 next But once we got heads up, I mean, this is going to sound really cocky, but it really felt like a foregone conclusion once we were heads up. That I just don't think this guy, who had generally not been playing that well, but he probably had no heads up experience ever. So as someone who played a fair bit of heads up cash, it was, and we were reasonably deep, it would have taken a lot for me to lose that match, I think.
Yet it's a $2,000 buy-in. And you're finding people at the final three that with that skill set, that skill level, it's amazing.
This is really a big thing for tournament players, though, to learn how to play heads up.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with a ton of people, and I've seen it on the TPE forums, and people are like, I'm not really much at heads up. As though that's something you can just accept, I'm just not that good at that. I mean, the equity difference between first and second place in a tournament is huge, and once you get there, it's too late. You can't just teach yourself heads up while you're at the final table of a tournament. So you really need to know how to do it before you get down to the final two. And it doesn't seem like that big of a deal because it doesn't come up that often. You spend the vast majority of the tournament playing nine-handed. But the difference between winning 60% of the time you get heads up and winning 30% of the time you get heads up, which even 30. Well, actually, 30 is a reasonable number. But, if you can double your chances of winning when you get heads up, that makes a tremendous difference in your ROI in a tournament. Bigger, I would think, than, getting slightly better at re-stealing or slightly better at defending your big blind or something.
That's a great point. And one of the things I've noticed about my own game since Black Friday and playing on the U.S. sites, which have much smaller player pools, is that I do get to play, I do make it heads up more often, or three-handed or four-handed, and that part of my game has gotten a lot better just because I've been able to practice it a lot more, and I'm, just giving me more confidence in the bigger fields when I get to that point. So I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. It does, you can't simulate it. It's a completely different game.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of simulating, what is the best way to get better at heads up? Do you play heads up sit and goes? Do you play heads up cash? Just try to get heads up a lot and get better at it as a result.
Just win a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, I know you're joking, but really not that second point, because again, I'll emphasize, once you're heads up, you can't afford to use that as your practice. That's game time. You have to already be good at it before you get to that point in a tournament. And obviously you can't actually count on getting there that often. So yeah, it has to be before that. I think both heads up sit and goes and heads up cash are good options. I think that although the sit and go might seem like it more closely simulates the final table experience, and there are certain things like push fold ranges or re-stealing ranges or shoving over a raise ranges when you're there that you're going to learn better in sit and goes. I do think overall the cash game is just better practice. It's not the things that you need to do well to win at 100 big blind heads up poker apply perfectly well to 40 and 30 big blind poker. The actual mechanics of them are different, but the skill set is the same, and the reverse does not apply. So even if you know your 15 big blind shoving ranges and calling ranges cold, if you get to a tournament and you're 40 big blinds deep, there's a lot of poker there that you don't know how to handle.
Right. And because most tournament players don't have that skill set, you can create such a big edge if you are good at it. It's just such a huge edge you can create for yourself. There's not a lot of edges to be had.
Yeah, and I think that's potentially one of the big advantages that maybe a Vanessa Selps or some of these other people. People will wonder how is it what's the difference between a Vanessa Selps versus, I don't want to use a name, but someone else who's generally a very good tournament player but doesn't have and has good results, but not Vanessa Self's results. And I think there's, it's quite possible that one of the biggest differences is her just being better at shorthanded and heads up play. And right. So they make the same number of final tables or the same number of final table bubbles, but then, she really pulls out and her extra edge, which is tremendous because of how important those situations are. But the reason why she wins and they get 12th or they get third or second even, is that she's just better at playing those short-headed situations. And I think you can probably replace Vanessa Selfs with Mike McDonald or a number of other people you would think of as just people with truly extraordinary results. I think a lot of it comes from just being good closers.
It's great.
Great. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Well, we've babbled on long enough, I guess. Time to get into the serious discussion of tournament poker strategy.
Oh my God, more serious? It's gonna blow my head up.
So we have a couple of hands tonight, actually. First one was actually emailed in by a user and who started off by saying that he's a listener of the podcast and wanted to know our thoughts. He probably didn't want our thoughts on the hand, but probably wanted whoever the pro was going to be on the podcast, their thoughts on the hand. And they're lucky because it's you, so we thought this would be a good one to go through to start things off. Do you want to go through this first hand, Diego?
Sure. So is this going to be weird for you, Andrew, not reading the mailbag? Don't you usually read the mailbag, right?
It's nice not having this kind of responsibility. I actually am recording this call out of habit, but it was nice not having to stress over whether I clicked the record button or not.
Derek, you did press record, right?
Oh no!
Don't worry, guys. I got you.
I wish every podcast guest was as reliable as you. Meaning, show up. All right. So, from the mailbag, this guy's good timing. He mailed this morning, I think, or yesterday.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. So good
Oh,
timing.
wow.
So,
You guys turn around your emails quick. If you get read on the Thinking Poker podcast within 3 months of writing to us, that's a good turnaround time.
Yeah, it was sitting actually in the shared TPE support mailbox, and we hadn't cleared it out yet, so it was right in our, we hadn't filed it for future, so it was right there. Okay, so this is, let's see what he says here. Okay, local tournament, $160 buy-in with $40 per player bounties and re-entries. I started with 8,000 in chips and have not shown any aggression. Have not shown any hands. Table is generally cautious and folding to aggression. I have no read on the villain except he's in his late 20s, early 30s with sunglasses, headphones, and a baseball hat. I am 40s professional. I'm not sure if it means he's a 40s poker professional or a professional person.
Yeah, I don't know.
I am 40s professional, use a rock for a chip protector, have folded some buttons, but have won pots with re-raises from position. So probably nothing distinguishing in either one of their play that would raise any ire, I think, at that point. Okay, level 3, 10-handed.
Well, I think we can assume some things that the villain is probably assuming about the hero just based on his appearance.
Okay.
Yeah, very good point.
Being in his 40s and using a rock for a chip protector are both probably, whether or not this guy actually means that he's a professional poker player, I would think there's a good chance that the villain is assuming that that our correspondent is not a professional poker player, is probably a little on the nitty side, not particularly sophisticated in terms of his analysis of poker situations. And to be clear, I'm not saying that's an actual description of our correspondent, but I think it's important to be aware of what you look like and what kind of assumptions people make about you so that you can use them against those people. So, if I were him, and I wish I looked like he did, sometimes I make active efforts to look like he did. I think there are opportunities to surprise players like this with bluffs or hero calls that they're not necessarily expecting.
So, did you take his description of the villain to be more of like a young grinder? He said late 20s, early 30s with sunglasses, headphones, and a baseball hat. Did you take that to be?
It could be young grinder. It's only a $160 tournament, so it could also be like young wannabe. But I think both of those people are going to tend to look at this guy in the same way, our hero in the same way.
Fair enough.
It's good that the guy who wrote in included that description of himself because it tells me that he's probably aware of his image and is conscious of what like you said, what that means to the villain. Right. So props to our listener for actually realizing that.
Yeah. What do you take from him saying, I folded some buttons but have won pots but re-raises it from position? Like, to me, what I said after reading that was probably not too much to take from that just because I don't think people would, okay, he's folded some buttons and won some pots from re-raises. I don't think people really notice that. That doesn't seem to be too much of a, whoa, that guy folded some buttons, right?
Not when it's some. It's
right.
Yeah, I'm assuming he would have said it if they'd been like really significant. So
yeah,
I think those things probably aren't mattering terribly much. Especially I'm not assuming the villain in this hand, even if he's a professional, he's probably not the most sophisticated professional in the world, just based on like the stakes of this tournament. There's a pretty decent chance he's not like a super attentive player. So yeah, I would think he probably has not noticed too much one way or the other about Hero's button tendencies.
Yep. Okay, so onto the hand. Level 3, 10-handed. Blinds are 75, 150 with antes of 25. So first off, that's an interesting ante size, right? 25 at 75, 150 seems...
Yeah, it's a big ante.
It's a big ante, right?
Yeah.
But they're still pretty deep stack. He says, I'm in middle position with a stack of 11.5k, and villain is under the gun with 9.5k. What do you make? Like, how does this affect your play when you get antes this early, and it's still you're still super deep now? You have antes in play. What does that do for you? Does it change your play much, or just? I mean, obviously that's changed your play a little bit because it's the pot's.
It should change your play a lot, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you're increasing the size of the pot. You're basically like doubling the size of the pot. So if you were to double the stakes, it would. Well, it's actually not comparable because you'd have to raise a large amount as well. But I mean, basically, you should be playing a lot more hands when there are such big antes out there. Like, there are a number of hands that you would fold to a raise from your big blind without antes that you should be calling with antes because you're getting a much better price. Yeah. There are a number of hands that you would open fold pre-ante that you should be raising with post-ante because of, because there's more chips out there, there's just more incentive to fight over those chips. So it definitely should be influencing your play. Yeah. The stack depth, and this is a big thing I see a lot of people misunderstand, like having a big stack or being deep is not a reason to play fewer pots. Right. It doesn't make stealing less important, or not very much so. It makes position more important. So you should be playing fewer hands from early position, the deeper you are, but you should be playing more hands on the button than in late position, the deeper you are.
Right, that makes perfect sense. And if you think about it, if the antes are 25, 10-handed, just an antes is 250 in the pot. Then you add the blinds is 225, so you're actually at 475 in the pot before.
Yeah, that's why I say that. The ante is double the size of the pot.
It's huge.
From what it would be without the antes.
Yeah, okay. Right, so once again, Hero's middle position, stack 11.5k. Villain is under the gun with 9.5k. Pre-flop, the villain limps from under the gun. And then I have ace of hearts, ace of diamonds. I raise to 450 from middle position. The button and the big blind call, as does villain. Pot is 21.25. So what are we inferring here? I think it feels like the raise size is too small to me. But what are your thoughts?
What makes you say that? No, what are your thoughts? What makes you say it's too
Sure. Okay, so, I mean, first of all, the villain limps 150. So he throws 150 in the pot. Now there's 625. I raise to 450. I am gonna assume, as are probably several other people at the table, that the villain is going to call that. So they're going to have more callers, and you're going to be playing, aces with 4 or 5 handed, and out of position to the later position players. So I would raise it a lot more, maybe like 600, 625, and hopefully just get the villain to call and everyone else to fold. That's my thought process there.
I still don't think you want other people to fold. I mean, you will win the pot less often when it goes 6-handed to the flop, but I mean, you're still better off having those people put the money into the pot than not. You're still ahead of any individual one of their raises, any individual one of their ranges, and you're you're making money when they call your raise. It'll be with a lower frequency, but when you do win the pot, it'll be much larger, and you will win the pot more than any one of them will. So, I mean, your objective here really ought to be to get as much money in the pot as you can. Like, the main reason I would say to raise to more than 450 is not to discourage people from calling as much as to just charge people more to call, and in particular to charge more to the under the gun player to call.
Right.
I mean, you might also want to think about what do you want to do with your whole range, because there are hands that you're raising here where you want folds. When you have ace king, want your opponent to fold a hand like 8-7 suited. When you have aces, they really are losing a pretty significant amount of the money that they put in pre-flop. You still have to be careful. I mean, it's possible that if you play your aces really badly post-flop, they could end up having the implied odds to make their pre-flop call correct.
Right.
I mean, correct in the sense that if they knew you had aces, like it will often be correct for them to call with 8-7 suited because you don't necessarily have aces. But, even suited connectors are a pretty big dog to pocket aces pre-flop. So getting money in the pot from them pre-flop is not by itself a problem. You just want to raise an amount that, if you were raising with other hands in your range, would give you some chance of making your opponents fold, which is nice. But also that when you do have aces, maximizes the amount of money you can potentially get into the pot. And one thing that I really emphasize in my Getting Paid series, which deals with value betting, is, and this comes back again to reading your opponent's hands, which we talked about earlier, the importance of doing that throughout the hand, is that you want to have in mind a value target. When you have aces, right, there are certain hands that you would really like your opponent to have. And those hands, the first and most obvious would be like pocket kings or pocket queens, where they have a hand that is already ready to play a big pot with you, that might well re-raise you and right, potentially get all in with you pre-flop. That's like the best case scenario. The second best case scenario is if your opponent has the sort of hand that could become a good one pair hand after the flop.
Right.
Which is not 8-7 suited. 8-7 suited people, even on like an 8-deuce-3 flop, most people aren't just going to go crazy and put all their money in. So 8-7 suited, you do make money off of the pre-flop call, but generally money that goes in post-flop, you're not such a big favorite. That's why you have to be careful.
That's kind of what I was alluding to. Why I don't want to play against 4 or 5 people, because when you have 5 or 6 people in, you're going to run into hands like that, which, especially if they have a position on you, are going to be dogs when a lot of money does go into the pot. I know it's probably hard to quantify this, but take these aces, middle position. Obviously, I'm a favorite against any other hand, but when you factor position into it, Andrew, how much does that change my equity when I get called by someone that has position on me? Like, I've never done an equity calculation on this, but if someone who has, I don't know, what is like 8-7 to aces? I guess probably not very good. But how much equity does it? How much? What is it?
Probably like 4-1.
Right. So how much does it add for them to be in position on me?
That's entirely a function of stack depth. And it's going to be stack depth relative to the post-flop pot size rather than to the pre-flop raise. So, and this is why I say, like, more callers is really not the end of the world. If Hero were to raise to, just hypothetically 800, not saying that's the right amount. If Hero were to raise to 800 and get called by 4 people, okay, honestly, I would prefer that to getting all fold or to getting 1 call. And that might sound surprising to some people because, you are going to win the pot less often. It's not that easy to outflop aces. Even with 4 people sitting the flop, it's not that easy to outflop aces. Once you go to the flop, there's going to be, you've got 4 people putting in 800, 5 people putting in 800 apiece, plus the pre-flop money. So there's going to be like 4,500 in the pot. And there's going to be less than 9K in this particular villain stack, probably in most people's stacks. So you're looking at a stack to pot ratio of basically 2. Yeah. Your opponents are standing to win about 10 times their pre-flop investment, which if they have small pocket pairs and they play perfectly after the flop, meaning they stack you when they flop a set and they never stack off when they don't flop a set, or they never lose any additional money when they don't flop a set, they're about breaking even with trying to set money with pocket pairs. Anything else other than pocket pairs has a much less good chance of outflopping aces. If you have even a suited connector is going to outflop aces something like 5% of the time. So only winning 10%, only winning 10 times what you had to pay to see the flop is really not good enough. If that's right. That's kind of their upside. So there's not really a lot of room for them to make you fold aces. There are certain flops that you can recognize as really bad, and you have the discipline not to put any more money in the pot with aces. So if the flop comes 7, 8, 9 with 3 hearts, or 3 spades, we'll say, because here doesn't have a spade. If it comes 7, 8, 9 with 3 spades and 4 people saw the flop with me, I'm probably not going to bet. I'll check and see what happens behind me, but maybe if there's one bet and everyone else folds, I might shove. But if it goes like bet, call, raise, that I can just fold without putting anything else into the pot. So there are certain circumstances where you can get away without, on especially bad flops. And I think some people tend to look at this as, well, if I just win it pre-flop, I won't have to worry about getting an especially bad flop, which is true. But you're also costing yourself the opportunity to to win all that money pre-flop from all those calls. Like it would be nice to win more than just like 700 chips when you have aces, and there's some risk involved in wanting to get that reward. But where I'm ultimately going with this is that you want to keep in mind the kinds of hands that you would most like to get action from, because it's a lot better for you to get action from a hand like king queen offsuit than from 8-7 suited, because the 8-7 suited is going to play reasonably well against you after the flop, whereas the king queen offsuit, it's very, very hard for king queen offsuit to outflop aces. What's far more likely is that the king queen will flop either a king or a queen, and then no matter how strong he sort of suspects that you are, most people don't have the discipline to just check and fold when they flop top pair. Like if he made the mistake of calling with king queen pre-flop, or playing king queen this way pre-flop, he's probably not doing that with the intention of just check folding when he flops a king or a queen. So you want. And I think a lot of people tend to make small raises with aces because they're like, well, I want to make sure I get action with them. But the truth is that you don't just welcome any and all action with aces. I mean, if you let a lot of people see the flop for only 450, that is kind of a mistake, because at that point it's costing them very little to try to outflop you, and even with only a 5% chance of outflopping you, they can do it, and then you have a lot of tough post-flop decisions. So you want to be charging your opponents a decent amount to see the flop against you, and ideally an amount that will like the hands that you really want your opponent to have are hands that can stand big action. If your opponent has kings or queens, he's not folding to a big raise. If he has ace queen, ace jack, king queen, he's probably not folding to a sizable raise. So it's not just like, well, I have to make it 450 or else I'm not going to get any action. If it were really that easy to make your opponents fold, you would just raise the 450 here when you had nothing and take the pot. And obviously it doesn't work that way. It's not that easy to make people fold. And so consequently, when you do actually get big hands, your first thought shouldn't be, oh my God, everyone's going to fold when I raise. I think you want to make a pretty sizable raise here. I don't think I would raise to less than 600. Most likely I would raise to 750. 750 seems pretty good. And I would do that with any hand that I chose to raise in this situation. Right.
Okay, that makes sense. So he does get, two callers behind him, and then, the button and the big blind, and then the villain, who ends up playing more of this hand with him, also calls. So the pot is 21-25 going to the flop. The flop is 7 of clubs, 4 of clubs, queen of hearts. And our villain, once again, has aces with the ace of heart. Villain checks, and he goes, I bet 2,000. So he bets 2,000 into 21-25. And the button and the big blind fold. So we can stop there for a second. He's betting basically pot size at this point, so I'm trying to figure out what he's thinking at this point.
I think he's thinking that he has aces and he wants to win the pot.
But he wants to kind of shut everyone down, and there is a draw out there, so I think that's probably why he's betting so big. Maybe afraid of the draw. He's trying to not give the draw odds to call, I think, is what he's doing there. I mean, I wouldn't bet this big.
A lot less than this is not going to give the draw odds to call. It kind of comes back again to our pre-flop discussion. Like, you want to get called by a draw here. You just don't want to get called by a draw that's getting the right price.
Right.
And so like you wouldn't want to bet like 400 here and then get called by a draw, but betting 2,000 and making a draw fold is not the best case scenario for you.
Right.
And the thing that I think a lot of people tend to underestimate the importance of, or not realize what a big problem it is the amount of information you're giving away with your bet. I mean, I would say when I see really any player, but especially a player who meets Hero's physical description, make a bet of this size on the flop, especially into 3 people, there's just no chance that he's bluffing. Like, he believes he has the best hand. Basically, what he's telling me with that bet is, I believe I have the best hand. Yeah. It's also a kind of vulnerable hand. I want to win now.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said about that. One is that when you have the best hand, you don't want to win now. Wanting to win now is what you should want when you don't have the best hand.
Yeah.
Right. And not that you should do this, but I mean, if you were to have ace king in this situation, if you forced me to bet 2,000 with either ace king or aces, I would rather do it with the ace king, because there's or even more so if I had like 8-9. where there's like a chance to make people fold hands that are better than mine. Winning immediately is really nice when you can't win otherwise.
Yeah, right.
Winning immediately is not nearly as nice when you have a hand that is very likely to win at showdown. Even with 3 people saying the flop, even with there being a draw on the board, you are still very, very likely to win the pot at showdown, especially if some of those people fold to a flop bet. So, and it doesn't have to be a pot size bet to make people fold, a hand like pocket eights or maybe even 7-6. So, yeah, it's just like your number one objective here should not be protecting against the draw. It shouldn't be making sure you win the pot immediately. It shouldn't even be making sure you win the pot at all. It should be getting your opponents to make mistakes. And that, in this case, the mistake you would like them to make, you're never going to make someone fold a hand better than yours. You're never going to make them fold a hand that has the right odds to call you. What you can make them do, and what you have a very good chance of making them do, is calling with a hand that does not have the right odds to call if they knew what your hand was. So you want to think about what are those hands that will give me action. You mentioned the flush draw, which is right, and the next most obvious example is a queen. Anyone who has a queen is not going to fold to 1 bet. Probably anyone who has 5-6 is not going to fold to 1 bet. And then depending on how loose your opponents are, you might get called by lower pairs, you might get called by gut shots, you might get called by backdoor heart draws, or some person who randomly has ace-king or ace-jack or something. They might call you with worse hands, but I think you really want to focus on, the queen is the best case scenario for you. Like anyone who has a queen plus another card is a huge dog to your hand, but is also very likely to think they have the best hand.
So, Andrew, what is the best bet here to get value from the queen, considering all the stuff that could happen on the turn and river too with the cards that might come out? Like, what would you bet to get that value?
If we were throwing concerns about information to the wind, where we're saying like we assume that our opponents are going to make their decisions 100% based on their cards, not even going to think about what our bet means, then I think the 2,000 would actually be okay in that scenario, because I do think that people aren't going to fold a queen even to a big bet. People just don't fold top pair, kind of with good reason. It's not easy to make a hand as good as top pair. There's some like game theoretical reasons to be stubborn with it, but so if that were the only concern, betting 2,000 would make sense. To the extent that you're concerned about your opponent actually thinking about your hand, if I saw the flop here with king queen, I would fold to this bet.
Yeah.
Now, you can ask yourself how much credit you give your opponents for being able to do something like that. But, I also think there are people who might call this bet but then fold to further bets, whereas they wouldn't do that if you had made a more normal-sized bet on this flop. So you might also want to think about, what would I do here? What other hands could I have played this way? What would I do here if I had, say, ace-jack of clubs? What amount would I want to bet? As we did pre-flop, you kind of want to think about what would I do with my whole range. And I think that becomes less important the deeper you get into the hand. When we talk about turn and river bet sizing, I think it's less important to be concerned with balance. But pre-flop and on the flop, I think it's a bit more important because people have so many opportunities to observe your patterns. And I think it's kind of funny because a lot of tournament players will tell me, I don't think balance matters at all in tournaments. But at the same time, those people don't vary their pre-flop bet sizes. And I think they're right not to, but that's a balance thing. Like, you're raising the same amount pre-flop because you don't want to give away information about your hand. And I think a lot of the same arguments that apply to pre-flop sizing apply to flop sizing. If you routinely bet more when you hit than when you miss, or vice versa, that's not a difficult pattern to pick up on. It doesn't take a genius to pick up on that. The deeper you get into the hand, the more situations become distinct from each other, so people have fewer opportunities to observe your behavior. You play fewer turns and rivers, so people have fewer opportunities to observe your behavior. And maybe most importantly, you start to have a more clear idea of what your opponent has, and so you can do more kind of playing his hand. At this point, we're up against 3 people. We don't even know who the main villain is going to be yet. We don't have much idea of what their hand is. We really can't play their hand yet. We still have to kind of play our own range. And then the deeper we get, the further we get into the hand, the more we can start to think about just manipulating him rather than keeping our own range balanced.
So is there any validity to the line of thought here that if I bet, this 2,000 is going to kind of force him to a decision on if he calls here, or anyone calls here, it's going to make the turn decision the critical decision if he's going to stack off on this or not, and therefore more likely to fold a queen because he gets scared for his tournament life. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing that right, but I feel like
it's like a leverage thing. You're
right, exactly, leverage. Right,
you're kind of communicating to him that this is going to be a big pot, and you don't really want your opponent. The more that you can keep your opponent making standard plays rather than actually thinking about what he's doing, that's a good thing for you. So when you make a suspicious, when you do anything suspicious, like either overly big or overly small, your opponents will stop and think about what it means. Versus if you bet an amount that seems normal to your opponent, they're probably just going to be like, shrug, I have top pair, I call, and not even think about what you're doing. So I think you're right. When you make a big bet size, your opponent might start to think, oh, geez, that's a lot of my stack. Do I really want to play a big pot here with king queen? What does this guy have? Exactly. Hey, it sure seems like he has no repair. He's 40 and he has a rock as a chip protector. Maybe he is a rock. Maybe I should think about folding my king queen. He probably has top pair. I'm going to fold a queen face up. Like that's probably actually happened to this guy before.
Right, and I want to get him thinking, well, I'm going to call him with a king queen here. I'm not folding king queen here, and then in the turn I want him thinking the same thing. I'm not folding top pair.
You don't want him to realize the existential threat until it's too late.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so what would you bet here? Like with all these people in the pot and the draw, like the first thing I think, just intuitively, is like 1,200. What is your?
That's about what I was going to say. I don't think it has as much to do actually with the number of people in the pot as with the. It actually strikes me as a slightly small bet size. If you were deeper, but the stacks are actually pretty shallow at this point.
Yeah,
there's 2,000 in the pot, and there's like 9K in villains stack. We don't know what all the villains have, but even so, there's like less than 6 pot size bets in hero stack.
Yeah.
And the upshot of all that is that you can easily get all in by the river if you want to.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
More than half the pot.
Right, that's exactly what I'm saying. It feels like 1,200. Like I didn't write it down, but it feels like 1,200 would get us to a pot size bet at least on the river to get it all.
Yeah, I think it would actually probably be more like half pot bets all the way. Would be like you bet 1,200 now, you bet 2,000 or so on the turn, and then you shove like 4,000 on the river. That's pretty close to his whole stack.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Sounds right.
Okay. So all right. Well, going back to it once again, the flop is 7 of clubs, 4 of clubs, queen of hearts. Our hero has ace of hearts, ace of diamonds. Villain checked. Hero bets 2,000. The button and the big blind fold. The villain deliberates, even spreading the pot to count what is in it. He calls. Pot is 61.25. What is that? What do you think of that? I'm just going to ask you.
Whenever people spread the pot, or ask the dealer to spread the pot, is usually what happens. I can never decide if that's like, okay, well, he must be good because he's actually trying to figure out odds and stuff, or if I think, well, he's not good because he should know what the pot size is without having to have it spread. But, Andrew, you might be more of an expert on that than me.
I really wish Nate were here because he's really the one who knows this sort of stuff. But I'm inclined to think it's going with my initial read that this guy is either like a young grinder or a wannabe. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Each of those things would suggest something different. I think from the young grinder, this would likely be a ploy where he's like pretending that he has a tough decision, and this is kind of like a weak means strong sort of thing where he's like, oh, what am I going to do? I can't decide. I have to have you spread the pot for me. Help me make this terribly difficult decision. So it could be like an overacting kind of thing from the young grinder type. From the wannabe type, I think it's more him like showing off. He's like, I know the pot odds are important, and I'm gonna make a show of deliberating over the right things before I make my decision. And those would indicate 2 very different types of hands. In the first case, it would indicate a monster hand that he feels compelled to get fancy with and make a show of it. And in the latter case, it would indicate a draw or some sort of kind of marginal hand. The reason I'm inclined to think it's not it would be sort of weird if he had a draw, went to the effort of counting out the size of the pot, and then decided to make a blatantly bad call.
Yeah.
like what was the point of counting the pot and then finding out that the bet was the size of the pot and then deciding you're going to call anyway with your draw. But then again, I think people do actually do that. So I don't know. I mean, like people chase and then just like, I don't know, come up with justifications for it or whatever. But I do think that he's less likely to do that with a marginal hand. So we talked about this hand reading thing already. I think if he has a queen, he doesn't do this, which is unfortunate because a queen is what we really wanted him to have. But I don't think he makes this sort of show with the queen. The pot odds, pot odds actually matter, but people tend to think about pot odds more when they're drawing. So I think that he probably either is putting on a show with a monster or is making a bad call with a draw. In some sense, the draw is more likely because it's easier to flop a draw than it is to flop a monster. Just looking at this board, I think it's kind of unlikely Villain is playing like Queen 7, Queen 4, maybe 7-4 suited, but even that's a little unlikely as an under the gun limper. So pocket queens is pretty unlikely. So in terms of like actually flopping a set, there's only 6 combinations of that. I guess there aren't actually that many combinations of club hands you could have either, if we're not giving him credit for like gappers. But suited aces are probably plausible hands for him,
yep.
and some suited connectors. So it might actually be closer to 50-50 in terms of draws versus monster hands. Now that I think about it, if you throw 5-6 into his range, that gives him a couple more draws, but it's probably only 5-6 suited. So, given that, draws are a bit more likely, but this behavior, I think that some people who would make this behavior with a draw would fold after counting it out. So that maybe makes it more like 50-50 whether he has a draw or a monster.
Would you shove or fold here if you had a draw in his case? Ace, maybe, with an ace high draw.
Yeah, with any other draw, like if it's not 5-6 of clubs or the ace high draw, then it's a fold because he has aces.
Yeah.
So with the ace high draw, because the thing is, like, Villain would probably do the same thing with kings. Maybe not with king queen though. Villain here meaning hero. Like, I'm putting myself in the actual villain shiz. I actually think if I had the wherewithal to think through it this far, it's actually pretty likely that your ace isn't live, because it's not live against ace queen. It's not live against aces. So. Folding the nut club draw could actually be correct here, which is kind of weird. 5-6 of clubs, I would call with, just because I don't think you have any fold equity at all. And this is actually something I talk about in my new bluffing series. But even with these hands, like a 5-6 of clubs, that's like the best possible bluffing hand. Right. I still think that you want a little bit of fold equity to shove it. Like, there's no sense in shoving here if you know for sure here Villain is going to call, because there is some chance that you could represent something later. Like, maybe I call now and then the board pairs on the turn and I bet at that point. And like, you really only need like some very small shred of fold equity to make a bet correct. Or maybe you miss on the turn and Villain bets again and you're able to make a correct fold. That's actually a more important thing to talk about. Right. I think a lot of people, again, they'll like, well, I know I can make a plus EV shove on the flop, so why would I wait until the turn is a blank and then fold? The thing is, you want to look at it as an opportunity to see the turn for cheaper. Like, the turn is going to be what the turn is going to be, and the question is whether your stack's going to be in the pot before you see the turn or not. And so giving yourself the opportunity to fold on a blank turn, that's an opportunity. It's not a bad thing. So I think some people want to put the money in here so that they don't have to fold on a bad turn, but I would rather look at it as I get to fold on a bad turn. I get to find out that the turn is going to be a blank before I put the rest of my stack in the pot, and therefore I'm able to make a good fold that, if I got all in on the flop and then saw that turn card, I would have wished I had the opportunity to pull 7,000 chips back out of the pot and muck my hand.
Right. And do we think with our hero, who's now the villain, his bet of 2,000, we have enough to fold on the turn? There's enough left in our stack to fold.
Sure. If let's say that we knew for sure hero had aces, right? We're that confident. We know for sure he has aces. So we call now. There's 6,000 in the pot. There's 7,500 left in villain stack. If the turn is a blank, let alone like the turn being an ace or some other like truly a board pairing card, maybe it reduces your equity a bit. But even if the turn is like a complete blank, the jack of diamonds, you now have your 15 outs, which may be 14 outs if hero has the ace of clubs. So you have either 14 or 15 outs going into the river. That's about a 30% chance of hitting. So you can't even call a pot size bet on the river. Right. Maybe you can if you assume a little bit of implied odds when you get there. Villain might pay off a bit, but you're not in a position to call a huge bet on the turn.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so we left here. Now the pot is 61.25. Like I said, the hero bets 2K, villain calls. The turn is the king of spades. So it's the board is 7 of clubs, 4 of clubs, queen of hearts, king of spades. Villain checks again, and here the hero bets 3K. Is there any reason to bet now? Should you check behind? I know you're always trying to go for value. But now the king, the queen king. Although I'm trying to place the value the amount of times he has the queen after that whole deliberating and spreading the pot ruse. But do you bet here for value, Andrew, or do you keep the pot small now and try to get the showdown cheaper?
Well, I'm not that worried about the king. I think the bigger question is how confident I am. I mean, I kind of concluded after talking through the flop that it was like 50-50 that villain had either a draw or a monster hand.
Right.
So, we can basically assume we're drawing practically dead against the monster hands. Flop to set, we have two outs against that hand. So we have like 4% equity against the flop set. So putting money into the pot against the flop set is really, really bad.
Right. And
putting money into the betting against a draw is not worth anywhere near 100% of the size of the bet.
Right.
If we're called, if it's by 6-5 suited, then we get something like 70% of that bet. If it's a worse draw than that, then we're going to get more like 80% of the bet. But in any event, considering that when we're behind, we're dead, and when we're ahead, we're only like a 70 or 80% favorite. I think if you're really confident in that read on the flop that he has one of those two hands, then I think you would want to check. And it kind of sucks. I think a lot of people are looking at this and saying like, well, A, how are you so confident? Which, maybe you're not. If you think he could still have queens in his range, that's a different story. But if you are comfortable reading a lot into his flop behavior, then I think that you do want to check behind, because putting money into the pot against his range that's a bad thing for you. You just kind of have to accept that giving free cards to draws is the price that you pay for not putting money in bad against sets.
Right. So yeah, here's my thinking on it. So I'll summarize why I check behind and tell me if any of these lines are wrong. So first of all, I think he's unlike, like, as far as him having a queen to pay off my bet, because he certainly probably will call if he has a queen here. But he's not going to have ace-queen many times, because I have two aces. And king-queen, now is ahead of me. And, queen-jack, queen-10 maybe, right? So, yeah, maybe I'll get some value from those guys. But even those guys are getting afraid now and maybe might not call my bet. Monsters obviously are calling me and I'm behind them, so why do I want to put more in there? And draws are probably going to fold here. So if I was to bet, I'd bet, enough to make the draw unprofitable, but most of those draws are just going to fold anyway. So,
well, making draws fold is worth something, but
right.
Yeah, I think that the rest of those are and you're right. It's not nearly as much as like the upside of that is not nearly as good as the downside of betting into a set is bad.
Right, and if a draw comes in and he makes a small bet and I call, it's not it's not the end of the world.
Well, we'll talk about that on the river.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about it on the river.
Good.
But he might also, he might take a stab at it on the river if something doesn't come in, right? If he has a draw and it doesn't come in, and I let him get to the river for free, and a draw doesn't come in, he might bluff it in, and I can call and get chips there.
And at that point, you have 100% against a missed draw. Like
exactly.
Yeah, then like you're better off putting money in the pot against a range that's like 50-50 monsters or missed draws, because at least you either win or lose 100% of the time versus losing 100% but only winning 80%.
Right. So I feel like it's better to just check behind here. Okay, so I'm glad to hear you agree. But we'll get to the point on the on if he bets if a draw comes in. Mm-hmm. Okay, so villain checks. I bet 3K. Villain deliberates again, and he calls. So I'm pretty scared now. What are you thinking here, Andrew, with this call?
So much of this depends on, like, it's such a stupid spot for villain to slow play again here.
Yeah.
With only having 4,000 left in his stack. Like, I think hero is not very likely to fold aces if villain shows for 4,000 more. Like, a player who bets 3,000 on the turn with 4,000 behind is not folding any hand that would be capable of calling a river shove. And I want to jump ahead a bit and just say what villain ends up doing is shoving the river. We don't even have to talk about what the river card was, but just if we assume that in the scenario where villain is slow playing, it's a pretty dumb line for him to call now and then shove 4,000 on the river. Like there are very few river cards that are going to cause hero to call a bet that he wouldn't call on the river, that he wouldn't with a hand that wouldn't just call a shove now. And there's the real risk that the river ends up being like a club or something scary.
And he folds. And
he
folds
like
and
hero fold or something.
Right.
So against a player I respect, who really wouldn't have taken this line to begin with, but I mean, I think that just calling here with only 4,000 behind is actually a pretty good indicator that he doesn't have a monster, because if he had a monster, like I would think he would just put it in now and expect to get paid off. But, you do see people who just, excessively slow play and slow play in bad spots, and this could easily be that going on.
Well, the $160 buy-in makes me feel like that the frequency of that is much higher than in a different size tournament.
Exactly. Yep. So I wouldn't rule it out entirely, but I would discount slightly the possibility that he is slow playing, which is nice.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like these guys in 160s are slow playing here a lot. I just feel like
even if it's a lot, like reducing it from 100% to 80% is nice. Like thinking that there's at least a 20% chance he would have stuck it in here.
Right. Okay, so well, the river is the 4 of hearts. I mean, it puts another 4 out there, but how many 4s do we think he really has?
For him to call him the bear 4, I don't see that.
I don't see that, and it discounts the set of 4s, right? I mean, that adding that extra 4 there. And the villain immediately fires all in, about 4K. Like, as much as you said, you don't think that a monster slow plays here. I mean, I can't imagine that he thinks now he can his bluff. He could bluff a misdraw for 4K into this pot, which is, I don't know. He didn't put the size of the pot, but I think it's about 12K at this point.
12.1K.
So when he bets 4K into a 12K pot, I can't imagine a misdraw doing that. When, to the same point you made, Andrew, that you probably would call that with most of your hands. Like, what do you think of that?
Whatever he has, he played it badly. Like there's no hand that villain could turn over where I would say, oh yeah, that was really well played. So I mean, either he made a bad slow play or he's making a bad bluff now. I don't have a ton of experience in these 160s. I mean, it sounds like you think people do make bad slow plays a lot. I don't know if you think people also make bad desperation bluffs. But I mean, the way I would look at it is, you're getting 4-1 on the call, and although it's kind of hard to construct a scenario where he's bluffing, I also think it's a little difficult to construct a scenario where he has a monster hand. I think there's good arguments against both of those. I still don't think you're going to see one pair. Like I do think he has either a monster or a bluff.
Right.
But he only has to be bluffing about 20% of the time. I do think there are some good reasons why he shouldn't have a monster here. As you say, the 4 discounts the monsters a bit. There are draws that missed. I think you would need a pretty good read to fold. I wouldn't want to fold just based on the information that we've seen here. And then the one thing we didn't discuss that's a small consideration, there is a $40 bounty if you call and are correct, and that adds a little bit of equity as well.
And there are
there
are re-entries in this too, so a lot of people play a little looser there in this spot because of that.
Yeah, he might be a little less deterred from bluffing than he would otherwise be.
Right.
I was actually thinking when I saw that the river was a 4, I was kind of thinking to myself, it's pretty much the best card for us. I thought, because
I think it's
like
really,
you said,
except for an ace, it is the best card.
Oh yeah, because it discounts the set of 4s. It makes King Queen no good anymore. So now we're really only worried about a set of queens.
Oh, that's right. You're right. I forgot. I didn't put it. That's right. It gives us 2 pair now to his. If he got a weirdly played King Queen here, that we're better than that now. Right. Right.
Yeah. So I can't imagine a universe in which I'm folding. But
yeah, I think this is a pretty clear call without a good read. I'm more interested in Diego, the point that you started to make on the turn, which is you said, let's say that the river is the 4 of clubs instead of the 4 of hearts. You were saying
the 4 of clubs is on the flop already, so
okay. So we'll call it the 8 of clubs then.
8 of clubs, right? Yep. Okay.
So it sounded like you were thinking about calling a small bet on the river.
I was, yes.
I think I would actually be more inclined to fold there, even if you check behind the turn. So we were talking about a scenario where hero checks behind the turn.
Yeah. Let me clarify that. If there's 4,000 left, I mean, a small bet is kind of weird. It would make me rethink the whole thing. But if the pot would be 61.25, and the turn went check. The turn went check. I checked behind, and the club comes in. Right? Okay, so that's the scenario we're talking about, right?
Right. So let's. I don't know if you consider it cheating or not for me to call it the 8 of clubs on the river, but let's start by the 8 of clubs, which also completes the open-ended straight draw. I think
that's different because it doesn't.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
okay. Start with
so let's start with that scenario.
Yeah.
So the 8 of clubs on the river, villain bets 2,000 after hero checks behind the turn. I think it's a fold.
With the 8 of clubs, 2,000 into 6,000 does seem value-y. Okay, I agree. Yeah, so much stuff that came in. That so much stuff just came in. That I'm good.
Well, and if we were saying we were sort of waiting in 50-50 between monsters and draws, every draw got there.
Right. Yeah.
Or he had a monster in the first place, and it doesn't matter.
I agree.
That's the key, and that's where this hand rating stuff matters. Where even without breaking down the possibilities, and I know I kind of did. I did a slightly more sophisticated hand reading where I talked about specific combinations. But even if you just say to yourself, villain has either a monster or air. Once you get to the river, there's no more air. Like when it's that river card, there is no air for a villain to have, which you don't beat anything at that point. There's you can beat Ace Queen, but he wouldn't play Ace Queen this way. Like he wouldn't play marginal hands this way, unless you think that he would. I mean, if you don't ascribe as much importance as I did to the spreading out the pot thing, but I mean, other than that, then that's why hand reading matters. Like you can save yourself those 2,000 chips on the river rather than just say. And I'm not saying this is your thought process, but I think a lot of people think this way. With just like I checked the turn, so I induced a bluff or I underrepresented my hand, therefore I have to call the river. That doesn't matter if villain doesn't have hands that could bluff in his range, or underrepresenting really only matters if it's going to lead villain to overvalue a marginal hand, and here there's no marginal hand for him to do that with. So I still think you can fold on that 8 of clubs river. You make the river 9 of clubs so that 5-6 miss. It's a little more complicated because now there's 4 combinations of bluffs he could have. So, I mean, you'd have to count the number of monsters, but I still wouldn't be surprised if it's a fold on a 9 of clubs river, getting 4-1. I mean, so if he has 4 value hands, he would have to have, if he has 4 bluffing hands, we'd only have to give him 16 value hands to turn it into a fold. We're already counting 6 combinations of sets, so I think you have to have 10 combinations of flushes. Yeah, maybe it would be a call in that scenario, but I think the 8 of clubs is the fold, and I think the 9 of clubs is the fold if he bets 3,000 instead of 2,000.
Interesting. I love this hand rating stuff. I'm actually going to go back and watch
I'm going to rewatch the series.
I forgot how good it was.
I hope that what this drives home to people is how powerful it is. Because I have a sense a lot of people are looking at this and being like, how the hell did he get to the point where we're talking about villain couldn't possibly have a queen? And that actually comes down more to his physical behavior than to his hand rating. But there are a lot of situations where just like the amount of money that he put in the pot or the way that it went in, indicates that he couldn't have a marginal hand. And this is also stuff that I think is laid out pretty well in the hand reading series. So basically that's the starting point to learn how to do this sort of thing. But if you're very surprised by some of the stuff I'm talking about on the river, that should indicate to you the power of hand reading and convince you that you should be trying to learn how to do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely check that series.
Yes. So let me give you the results here. Well, actually, I don't have results. He decided he does not have a 4. Right. I don't think he would play suited King 4 or Queen 4 under the gun. I doubt he would have called the flop bet with Ace 4 even of hearts, although possible. I fix his range as trip 7s, trip or quad 4s, all of which have me crushed. Was he acting when he called on flop or turn? I beat King Queen or any other 2 pair, possibly of clubs. If it was King Queen clubs, he might have raised under the gun or shoved on turn, or he has a failed flush draw. If I call and lose, I have 1,800 in chips with blinds going up in 5 minutes to 100, 200 with 50 antes. Decision. So he doesn't give us results, but I hope he does. He's a podcast listener. I don't want to give out his email address. Do you give out email addresses, Andrew? Or no? On the Thinking Poker podcast?
No, certainly not.
Okay, all right. So I won't give out your email address.
Well, he said he's a listener, so I have a feeling
he'll
listen to this. And if he's not a member and not posting in the forums, then he should just email us back and let us know, because I want to know.
Okay.
All right, well, good discussion. We, sometimes we'll cover more hands, but this one was really interesting and really in depth. And we did talk a little bit of strategy in some of the other segments, so I think we can wrap it up there. And Andrew, I know you're a busy guy. You probably got a podcast to record yourself, so we'll let you get out of it.
Thank you for staying up so late with us here. Appreciate it.
We have day jobs, so we have to do these things at night. Yeah, very much appreciated. For those of you who are not already doing so, you should follow Andrew on Twitter at Thinking Poker, and also obviously check out the Thinking Poker podcast, which is in the iTunes store and also over at your blog/website, which is thinkingpoker.net.
Thinkingpoker.net. You find the blog there, and anytime there's a new podcast, it's posted there as well. I also advertise the new podcasts on Twitter. And there's information about coaching is there on thinkingpoker.net as well if you decide you're interested in that.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Andrew, for joining us. Definitely appreciate it, and we'll make sure that not another 2 years goes by before we get you on the show.
It was fun. I'd be happy to do it more often.
Awesome. Thanks again, and stick with us. We'll take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll wrap things up here on the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. Welcome back to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. Big thanks to Mr. Andrew Brokos for stopping in. Always loved his videos. It was really nice to sit and talk through some strat with him.
Yeah, I mean, that's like top grade Class A poker strategy, man. That I love talking poker with him. It always expands my mind.
Yeah, and obviously you've known him a lot longer. I've only had the chance to meet him a couple of times, but just from watching his videos and stuff, he's just so... Obviously a great poker player based on his results and whatnot, but he's just so good at communicating concepts and stuff.
Yeah, he's very patient, too. He's very patient. Like, I think he said that. He's very patient with explaining things that may not be immediately apparent to you because you're not, you're not thinking poker 24/7 maybe as he is. Maybe you're not a professional. I mean, I think we probably grasped the fundamental concepts he was talking about, but for people earlier in their careers, he's great. He's great for that. I mean, he's a very, very clear speaker. I always enjoyed talking poker with him. He's a great guy to boot. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're a member and you haven't watched his videos, which I find hard to believe, but if you haven't, check them out. If you're not a member, sign up. Check them out. Well worth every single penny. Speaking of TPE, let's talk a little bit about what's going on over at TPE.
Yeah, so TPE University has launched. We mentioned it being imminent on the last podcast, and it is here and up and running and thriving. So for those of you who didn't hear the last podcast, we launched a sort of course-based, module-based lesson plan for getting and using and leveraging TPE. So we've broken the best of the best content into different functional topical areas that you can go through in order if you want. They're built in an ordered format, but you can also kind of jump around if something's more interesting to you. There are a couple like specific courses. So basically, if you go through it and there's a number of courses you have to take, and a number of videos you have to watch, and a number of quizzes you have to pass, and you get a passing grade, and you'll be complete with TPE University. And a couple of them are mandatory. Some of them are electives, and we cover all kinds of topics that we think are essential to a tournament poker player elevating their game. So from simply getting started at TPE to early stages, late stages, final tables, 3-betting, playing in position. There's tons of topics, and there's a lot of content in each one, and we've already had a couple people pass and complete the course, which is awesome to see. I think there was someone who finished it within 4 days.
Yeah, that's dedication.
That's dedication, and that guy has what it takes to become like a supernova elite.
Yeah,
because that's it's a lot of content you have to finish to pass these things. So yes,
yeah, and I think it's cool. It's like you said, it's not required. You can consume the content in any way you like. But for people who are maybe new to the site, or even people who've been around for a while, I mean, there's over 800 videos at this point. It's a lot to get through. So to have sort of a structure that you can follow and as just a way to consume all that information, I just think it's really cool. And we'll continue to build on it too as time goes.
Yeah, and the two main pieces of feedback we've gotten from our members over the years as the site has grown is I want a better way to consume the content. I don't know where to start. There's a lot of stuff here, and a lot of great stuff buried because it was 2 years ago or a year ago. Particularly the theory videos, which are in many cases timeless, but not on the front page, so they get lost. And I want a way to test what I'm learning, and this does both things. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback so far. So that is up and live and going, and you can go there if you're a TPE member. You have full access to TPEU as part of your subscription, no extra charge. And if you're not a TPE member but you listen to the podcast, you should go there and at least sign up for the free trial and check it out. Because we've made a lot of stuff within it free, and you could just do that, try out a course or two, and see what you think, and just use it that way. You can at least get a couple of free videos out of it. We're happy to have people trying it out. So,
yep, and let us know what you think of it. We love the feedback.
Absolutely.
How about on the video front? I know we got some pretty cool stuff running.
Yeah. Well, Andrew is currently running. So of course, his podcast is great, and his videos are great, and his videos always do well. And as he mentioned, he's running a series on bluffing right now. So a crucial component of your game. So I encourage everyone to check that out. Daryl Jace just finished a live sweat, and I'm really happy for him on this one because his first. Daryl is a brilliant guy, right? We've had him on the podcast. His videos are consistently rated as high as anyone else's, and what's funny is. He typically is one of those really in-depth. I mean, he's very similar to Andrew in the sense that he's a high-level thinker and he's theoretical and analytical. And I mean, talk about hand reading. He did a series on advanced hand reading where he did one hand for a whole video on one hand. And when you're talking to yourself. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? And he literally went through exploring every possible combination. I think Andrew talked about how he makes it a rubric to make it useful in hand, right? Classifying hands, monsters, draws, or marginals, and Darryl did the opposite approach where he took every possible combination of hands that the opponent could have, and looked forward 2 streets down the road, and to see how impacting his play there. So it's kind of like very a chess based way of thinking about it, I think.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. So Darryl, I mean, has a ton of fans for that reason. But his first Live Sweat, he's just a different guy on a Live Sweat, right? And he didn't have a great review to Live Sweat.
All that stuff's happening in his head.
Yeah.
That he did in his theory video.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's funny too because we probably talked about what we like about different videos and what we look for. I loved even that series.
Yeah, I did too.
I like a glimpse into the life of a frustrated MTT grinder, because that's what we all are.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes he can come off a little brash because of that and things like that. But I find it not only incredibly educational, but just fun as hell to listen to.
Yeah. So his first Live Sweat didn't do great because of that, but this Live Sweat has had stellar reviews, and he really, he's a quick learner, and he figured out how to do a Live Sweat well, and he did a great Live Sweat. So that just ended. So that's certainly a very popular series right now. And right before that, Danny N13 did a T-Coupe prep Live Sweat with a bunch of turbos. So if you're into the turbo game, that's going on. And coming up, Chris Moon has had a series of shootouts that we've been running on an interstitial basis. They're kind of like, each table is like its own little module. So we've been breaking that up over time, and we're going to close that out with the last table and then the final table. Spoiler alert, he makes it to the last shootout table, and he does that with Jamie Kerstetter, so that's pretty cool. And then Stick It to the Man.
No.
With Mr. Killingbird.
It's going to be pain.
I haven't watched every part yet. Does it get bad?
There's some spots where my old school internet comes out.
Cringe, huh? It's cringe.
Yeah, like I think not so much cringeworthy. And I'm not going to spoil too much of it, but I'll say that there's definitely some old Killingbird still within me.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of pretty very specific leaks that I had. Right. That Mark Eliotto, AZNL, and Devil 7 did the Stick It to the Man, and I'm actually, unlike past Stick It to the Man, I'm actually on with him while he's doing it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't take it easy on me, and he definitely identified some pretty, like, not even like a lot of leaks, but just two or three very specific things that I was doing very consistently. And I feel like I've plug those things already. Well, I'm beginning to plug those things already as a result of just that call with him.
Right.
But there's still a lot of work to do. That's the one thing I've come to realize. We talk about this a lot. Like you just never stop learning in this game.
Right. You don't.
And it's so funny because if you had said to me, you still do these two things that you did 2 years ago, sometimes. I would have said no. I don't do that anymore. I don't have that problem anymore.
Right, but you do.
It was scary to see him come out.
Is one of them lobby checking?
No, thankfully not. Although it's funny, I actually tend to do a little bit more of that now than I used to, because I actually feel now that I'm playing a lot of tables and stuff, there's value in making sure that you cash in some cases. It sounds like I'm regressing, I guess, to my old self, but sometimes in certain situations, it's important to cash the 215 major on.
I think
on a Sunday,
I think there's definitely been a shift in thinking around the value of cashing. Not necessarily that you want to play to cash, but I think there's definitely people, top level thinkers have recognized that the caching does have some value, and it does impact your decision a little bit. Depending, close to the bubble, not major way, but it does. There's some cases where it does play. So,
I think one of the things, and I don't think this gives a lot away, but it about the series, but it's a interesting sort of analysis. Is my play changes quite a bit later in the tournament, and one of the things Mark and I talk about a lot in the series is the fact that I play a lot of tables when I grind. Sometimes in the heat of my session, I might have 12 14, 15 tables. And he's like, oh my God, like I can tell now that you're down to 2 or 3 tables,
right,
because your play has completely changed.
Right.
Like you're opening in the right spots, you're 3-betting more, you're just you're doing all this stuff differently.
That's interesting.
Than you were doing earlier. He says, and you can just tell by watching, like in those early stages, you're just on autopilot a lot. Like you're raising and then just check folding flops. You're raising, c-betting and folding. You're never floating. You're just playing so ABC, and it's because you have 12 tables going. And he beats me up, and he's always like, you got to start playing those tables, bro.
Yeah. I think there's value in that. I do think there's value in play. I mean, I enjoy. There's obviously debates, and depending on what your hourly rate is, playing more tables could be more profitable. But I think if you're getting better at poker and playing slightly less tables, even if your hourly is not as high, I think it's better to do that.
Yeah, and it was funny because I was actually talking to Mark today, and I said, I'm gonna try it, man. I'm gonna experiment, and I'm gonna play fewer tables, and I'm just gonna see what happens. And if it works out, then I'll I guess I'll have to go with it.
Right.
But I'll miss my days of 6 screens on each monitor.
So what tournament is it that you guys cover?
It's the Merge Nightly 11. I was talking, I guess before we brought Andrew on, we were talking about the Merge Nightly 60, that I won. But the Merge Nightly 11 runs basically around the same time, and it's just another one of their sort of flagship tournaments. And I don't want to say where I finish in it, so I won't. But I'll say I make the final table, and we'll leave that.
You don't bubble it.
But yeah,
you don't bubble it. That wouldn't be a good series.
I don't. No, I can tell you I don't bubble it. But I think it'll be interesting to people who. Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to everybody. The Stick It to the Mans were always really popular, so I'm pretty excited to bring them back. But I think for especially people who maybe play on some of these U.S. sites or U.S.-facing sites, they'll find some interest in it because it is one of the tournaments that probably a lot of our U.S. members play.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's coming out. So it comes out Valentine's Day. So TPE Nation, this is my gift to you. I love you guys so much that I'm giving you KB's head on a platter.
It was enough time had passed. It's my turn to get ripped apart.
Yes, you deserve it. So, you deserve it. No one deserves it more than you, buddy.
and don't worry, you'll get your chance soon.
Yeah.
I'll make sure of it.
Well, and then I also our other gift to you is we'll be doing more podcasts more frequently. We apologize for some of the gaps and delays in doing these. The great news is people love this podcast, so they've been asking us to do more, and it's mostly my fault, so I take the blame and making sure that we clear the schedule enough to do these more often. So we won't have to wait 2 months between podcasts anymore. We're going to be much more frequent than that. So
you guys can hold us to that.
Yep. We'll do it.
It's our New Year's resolution.
Yep.
That took us until February 6th to make, which tells you a little bit.
But if we didn't resolve, this could have easily slipped to next week, but we made a lot of things happen that we made it happen. So thank you guys all very much, because you yelling at us to make more podcasts might seem harsh, but really it just tells us that you like the podcast, so we appreciate that. Cool. All right, TPE.
Right on. Thanks everybody for listening, and thanks again to Andrew, and we will see you guys next time very, very soon on the Tournament Poker Edge podcast.
Yep.
Like they do in Texas, please. Fold 'em, let 'em hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Lock in intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Carry mine, though she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Carry mine, though she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love it, it's not rough, it isn't fun.